What makes a Monster Hunter game a good Monster Hunter game? There have been many attempts at the genre, but none that have been as popular as the progenitor which started it all. Wild Hearts, Freedom Wars, God Eater, all have tried to fill the niche but never come close to competing. Does this mean they are bad games? Bad Monster Hunter games even? Do sales and global recognition play a factor in deciding if something is inherently good or not? Does player retention matter, and does a game need longevity to keep people coming back in order to be considered good or successful? Do those terms even mean the same thing? If you ask me, I'd say no. Success and quality do not necessarily come hand in hand. A game that sells 1 million copies may be at least subjectively less good than a similar game that sold fewer. The quality of a product at its core, its themes, mechanics, and everything that comprises its overall experience, is not the same as its marketability. A game could be considered a failure because it didn't sell as many copies as expected, or didn't keep those player numbers up long enough. But is that a correlation or a causation? Monster Hunter Wilds may have sold 10 million copies, but does that mean it is better than the games from the same series that came previously? I'd say no. Capcom is a business. They need to make money to continue to exist, but it's not just that simple. Selling 10 million copies doesn't necessarily equate to success for them because those sales can start to stagnate and slow in comparison to something like Rise or World. A company, by design, doesn't just need to make a profit, they need to make a bigger profit each year and every year. Otherwise, that company is failing. More money with every release, over and over again until you reach a boiling point where nothing can be done. You begin to stagnate, and so you shake things up. Change the model, need to keep player retention up, release a product that feels incomplete, and drip feed the rest of the game to players over time. Then by the time it's a complete product, people's memories are short, so the game could be looked back on as what it is now, rather than what it once was when they bought it. This works sometimes, but not always. The live service title update model of Capcom for the Monster Hunter series has seen some success, but that seems to be slowing down in comparison to past releases. So was it worth it? Was creating a more marketable product worth stripping the game of its content at launch, or changing fundamental aspects of the game to sell to a wider audience? Of alienating past fans of the series? Again, I'd say no. Around a year ago, I released my initial review of Monster Hunter Wilds. Due to how Capcom handles pre-release reviews, I was able to talk about a lot, but not everything I wanted to. Additionally, games like Wilds release in what I consider an unfinished state. So I mentioned planning to eventually revisit said video when the game had more of its content updates released. Well, with Title Update 4, all major updates to the game are finally out, and while there is a roadmap for some additional anniversary content in the future, Capcom has already stated they are developing the expansion for Wilds as we speak. Development for the base game is winding down, and there aren't going to be any game-changing inclusions or monsters that make it in moving forward. So now feels like the best time to look at Wilds as a complete package. All this, plus the various event quest additions, side quests, performance updates, and more, and we can see if the base game is finally at a point where it is considered complete and ready to be expanded upon with DLC in the future. If you're a fan of my videos, or if you've just seen some of my reviews and retrospectives surrounding this series, you should have a good understanding of how I view the progression of the series with each new release. I feel that is something I make very clear very often. It starts with my enjoyment of the older generations of the series, and how a schism was made alongside the release of the 5th generation of games, that being World onward. I don't like to beat a dead horse. I try to look at more recent comparisons to help better illustrate my views. How I feel about the series isn't just comparing Wilds to 3 Ultimate, but comparing it to World and Rise as well, more so even. This track record of simplifying and removing the identity of the series isn't just something that started at the end of GU and the beginning of World. It continues to happen, and I believe even World fans and players who first started the series with it are seeing that for themselves now. Every new entry will have its detractors and people nostalgic over the last entry before it, but I believe there is a systemic issue with Capcom's design philosophy and business model that is actively harming Monster Hunter at its core, and isn't the first time a Capcom series has gone through something like that. I don't care if a game sells well, I don't care if it retains players, I care about the game itself as just that, a game, an experience for my enjoyment because this is my review of it. A game could have 0 active players and still be one of the greatest releases of its time in my eyes. But even with 10 million sales, an incredible feat for any release, Wilds still slowed in terms of sales in comparison to previous releases. Again, that's still an insane amount of copies sold, a success in anyone's eyes, but to Capcom, this comparison and this stagnation is something worth their concern. Something they try desperately to prevent with their current games as a service business model, and the title updates designed to prolong the amount of time you return to the game rather than providing a complete experience from the get-go. Today we are going to be focusing on the main features of the game, the quests, the hunting, the exploration, etc. But still, it's a review and not a history video. While I will be going into many of the mechanics and content provided, I won't be covering absolutely everything, just what I think makes up the main experience, as well as what adds and detracts from that. If that sounds like your cup of tea, pull up a chair. And if you enjoy these videos, please consider liking, commenting, and subscribing. With that out of the way, I'm Super Rad, and this is the big Monster Hunter Wilds review. Monster Hunter Wilds was directed by Yuya Takuda, with Ryozo Sugimoto as producer and Kaname Fujioka as art director. It's the second Monster Hunter game to be developed on the RE engine, with Twisted Reflection, the story side series, soon to be the third. Taking 5 to 6 years of development time, the game would see an open beta released in October of 2024, after being announced at the Game Awards in December of 2023. The game would release February 28, 2025 with 8 million sales within the first 3 days, a record number for a Capcom product. They attributed this success to the use of open betas and regular development updates up to launch. Despite strong sales at the start, these would begin to wane and be overtaken by similar Capcom games such as Monster Hunter Rise and later Devil May Cry 5 with the release of their new anime. This was so bad in Capcom's eyes that they even bumped the release of updates in order to keep old players coming back and newer players purchasing the game. Why did sales begin to stagnate? There's several potential factors, but the biggest of all would have to be the performance. To say the performance was awful may feel like an understatement considering the blowback sown by players. Wilds even ended up having an overwhelmingly negative rating on Steam due to the game getting bombarded by fans upset with stutters, crashes, frame drops, and the like. While I also experienced my fair share of crashes, I won't be going into detail about all the technical issues, it's just not my forte. However, how these issues were dealt with, poorly at that, is something we can focus on a bit. If you're running a fairly strong rig, you may not have noticed any major issues with the performance of Wilds. But one of the most vocal gripes was how poorly it performed for how it looked graphically. Wilds wasn't stunning at release. Characters phasing into existence right in front of you, textures looking like blobby messes, and the low poly models loading in over their higher poly counterparts. There were a lot of issues with the game's presentation stemming from these performance woes that weren't simply FPS drops, although there were plenty. It doesn't help that, due to the nature of the storyline, almost every area you explore in Wilds is going to initially look like quite a mess. Messy, cloudy, and bland is going to be a huge amount of your initial hours as you explore this seamless open world of this Monster Hunter entry. It's rough and overstays, leading to what I consider an awful first impression. Now, this changes over time, and you even get to control the weather by taking a nap or resting, but it's no surprise players would be inclined to think that the game looks like garbage and then wonder how the performance can be so poor. Of course, there's more to it than that. A lot goes into the performance of a game, and that isn't always just what is front-facing, especially with something like the weather. But textures, pop-in, and everything else on top of this left a bad taste in players' mouths, and I'm not surprised. It was brutal for some and only got slightly better over time. If you're watching this video and maybe wondering what I'm talking about, that's because almost every title update, if not all of them, had articles and announcements from the devs saying they were going to work on improving the performance. And they did, slowly, over the better part of a year. and it was only one of the most recent final updates that made noticeable changes for most individuals, specifically those playing on PC. Can you understand how inexcusable that is? It's one thing if players just didn't know what they were talking about, but there are articles of developers admitting that they are aware that the performance on PC was abysmal. Even then, it took them a year into the launch of their finished product, I once again say with extreme air quotes, to get the game running in a state where people seem to finally be happy. Not everyone though, as many people feel this is still worse than it should be. It was brutal. All goodwill disappeared due to these issues, and I believe this to be a major reason for the game's bad reputation, although there are many other factors that we'll explore later on. I'm curious, at what point does a product get held accountable for this? Were the reviews enough? Does performing better now make up for the mess it was a year leading up to this? My personal experience with the game when it first released wasn't as bad as others, but that doesn't mean those issues didn't exist. And this seems to be getting worse with games as times move onward, and games are expected to continue being bigger and better looking within the market. What's crazy to me is that it didn't have to be this way with Monster Hunter, a series that was simplistic on the surface and then mechanically deep under the hood. You could boot previous Monster Hunter games on a toaster, man, so what changed? Well, marketability probably. Capcom wants to sell more copies. They do this in a number of ways, from making the game easier to making it open world and upping those graphics everyone is so pumped about. The series is notorious for keeping its original PS2 aesthetic through the majority of its lifespan, and yet, to sell to more players, we get better graphics, higher fidelity, more dense environments, whatever. And the cost of that seems to be a coin toss on whether you are going to be able to get the game to run at all or not. But what about the game itself and the development that brought it to fruition? The plan was to focus on the current entries and the future of the series. In an interview, Takuda and Sugimoto mentioned that there were no plans to remaster or remake older entries in the series. They attribute this to the series always being focused on multiplayer and the online capabilities that were available back during those generations. Considering how limited those may be nowadays, they believed updating the game so it felt good to play with the current online infrastructure would lead to so many changes that it wouldn't feel meaningful to call it a remaster, or remake, or whatever. The worry is that as times move on and technology changes, bringing these multiplayer experiences back to the masses requires so many changes you may not recognize the game for what it was. I don't know how I feel about that necessarily. I know from a player perspective I don't agree with it. I'm not developing a Monster Hunter game, I understand that, but I know that I have the means to play certain old school Monster Hunter experiences currently with the online capabilities despite the servers having been shut down. When I revisit those experiences, do you think I am complaining or unhappy with the online infrastructure as it was back then? Not at all, I'm just happy to have access to all of the content the game provides, and multiplayer is just one aspect of that. So whatever changes they are talking about must be beyond me because I feel like all I want is the bare minimum. The game I played previously on modern hardware with multiplayer functionality. I'd even take player-hosted servers, man, just give me my slop. With the focus solely being on the future of the series, we saw the development of Rise after World, followed by Wilds. Rather, dev time for the latest two games seem to always intersect at some point, so you aren't waiting 5 to 6 years for each release. While World had focused on the exploration of the new world and the Elder Crossing that was taking place within it, Wilds looks to develop the ecosystem more, with this becoming the core aspect of the game. Taking place in the Forbidden Lands, players would be able to not only hunt monsters, but watch as the behavior of these creatures changed with the weather and how the entire ecosystem works off of itself, showing how it being disturbed can have catastrophic effects. This led to the seamless open world where many of the maps are now more open than they are vertical and dense. That verticality is still there, but it's much easier to move from point A to B, especially within somewhere like the Windward Plains. Rather than just having packs of creatures placed in static locations and performing the same actions over and over, creatures were meant to actively seek out the resources they needed to survive. Did you notice that while playing? I personally didn't. Monster Hunter has always had a focus on ecosystems and endemic life, but even more so with the release of World and Into Wilds. And this focus has become so central, you would think it would be more apparent to the player all the work put in. But if I'm being real, I barely ever notice this outside of seeing smaller monsters wandering around or attacking larger ones. Think about it like this. You have all these resources going into this living, breathing world, But if you asked me, I wouldn't be able to tell the difference between this aspect of the game when looking at World and Wilds. At a certain point, there's diminishing returns, yet we are putting even more time into making these systems as advanced as possible for realism and immersion. Why? The core aspect of Monster Hunter is hunting the monsters, and hilariously, they even dumbed this down significantly from World, as you don't even track monsters any longer. So the thing that may have made you pay more attention to the environment, the tracking, has been removed, and there's almost no natural reason for the player to notice all this work they put in. What's the answer to that? On-rails storyline segments that force you to look at all the work put in, of course. Because that's exactly what I want in my Monster Hunter game. A bunch of storyline segments where the developers have me look at all the fancy systems they put in place that I will never interact with. Why not put a bigger focus on the monsters themselves? Let me find them and hunt them, and make them interact with the world more while I am actively engaging with them. They already tried to do that somewhat in Wilds. Why not make that a bigger focus over the environment itself and endemic life? We already had dense, lush maps full of creatures and world. If anything was fine as it was that. I think the maps could have been more open and even got that with Wilds too. The rest is just a waste of time. Other changes they focused on were making the cast fully voice acted, but with the addition of the Palico and Hunter as well. Although you can change the Palico to only use meows like previous entries, which I appreciated a lot. Wanting it to feel more cinematic, they changed the typical mission-based structure to something that allowed for a more seamless storytelling adventure, with hunters able to walk straight out of camp and hunt monsters out in the field, and storyline quests guiding them, or forcing them rather, to their next hunt without having to go through the menus to accept quests or assignments. One of the biggest changes, and they've mentioned this one themselves, was making the game easier overall. The team, wanting to make it easier for newer players to clear hurdles and defeat monsters, seemed to overcorrect in this aspect, making the game lack any sense of challenge whatsoever. Know that this is something the developers even acknowledged in interviews, and apologized for it. It is now a recorded fact that Monster Hunter has gotten easier over time, and it's not something we can chalk up to experience or nostalgia. Even worse, the more difficult content was supposed to show up in the updates, meaning the entire base game experience pre-updates was designed to be as easy as possible for newer players and act more as an introduction than something with actual substance and sauce. Imagine buying this game, expecting a challenge and something to sink your teeth into, only to learn you would have to be drip-fed the more difficult content over an entire year. That sounds absurd, but that is somehow the business model they have gone with, and one I see actively defended online. Call me a boomer, but if you're going to have an easier introduction to the series, something I think was already there, at least provide me with something to look forward to with my purchase, rather than something I have to wait for. I'm not playing an MMO where the difficult raid content is postponed to allow everyone to gear up for it. I'm playing a co-op Monster Hunter game that can generally be played solo as well. What are we doing? Additionally, they wanted to design the game in a way that would keep players continuously interested, and this has already been the model for a while. Title updates periodically release with new content to provide something for players to return to. The hope being that, even if you complete the game, you may return later. I have been fairly outspoken about title updates in the past. I think they were more a necessity with Rise due to COVID, but they were still around before that, and I generally see them as a means of releasing a game before all content is ready and providing an incomplete experience that will be fixed within a year. I don't like that model. I think it sucks ass. It's one thing to give me something with a clear start to end and everything you envisioned is there, and then providing an expansion to that later. But to just keep up these little releases until it's time for that expansion, and then do the same thing with the expansion until the next game is absurd. They don't want you to be able to take a break in between the releases, they want you to keep playing forever. Monster Hunter doesn't have to be a service. This is exactly what I meant when I compared it to the Call of Duty model in my initial review. It's annoying, and it gives them this out where they release a product that feels unfinished but then say, no, this was intended and all this other content is extra. How can I believe that? We haven't gotten into it yet, but did you guys complete Wilds before the title updates? It had the most abrupt, anticlimactic end to the more modern releases than I have ever seen before. Legitimately just beating Arkveld again and having a short convo about it and then nothing. Just release the game with the content you want in it and then release the expansion. but I guarantee that wouldn't fit their market timeline and execs wouldn't be happy. On a more positive note, developers also made sure to target both consoles and PC from the get-go, and we finally got crossplay, which people have been, for good reason, begging for. In terms of making the experience more easily accessible for new players, allowing friends to play together regardless of hardware is a great way to have individuals introduce their acquaintances to the series, and it's decisions like this that are purely a benefit in my eyes. That should be thought of and used more in order to entice more players to try the game out. Title updates have been around forever by this point, but this is the first time we get crossplay. The priorities seem really off to me. In terms of development priorities and direction, I'll probably never be happy with what Capcom is doing to the series. Character creation on the RE engine was probably at its best with the release of Wilds. Dragon's Dogma 2 seemed to blow it out of the water with tools that allowed you to make any type of character you wanted, from facial structure to body type. And you really could sculpt out like insanely detailed recreations of real-life individuals in that one. Wilds comparatively is lacking in that level of detail, but it's still leaps and bounds better than what you may be used to in a Monster Hunter game, or any other game you played for that matter. They even let you import your character from the beta test if you so choose. Additional options like bearing and voice pitch allow you to make the characters as uniquely yours as possible, but much like in my Stories 3 review, I wish there were more options for your overall body type so characters could look visually unique in aspects other than just their face. Still, the blending options are particularly nice, allowing certain characters to become a merging of the two, like with the Palico ears. I also love how games are more regularly allowing you to add color gradients to hair to create more natural dye/bleach jobs. If you want to get really unique, they have various more cartoonish paint jobs and eyes for you to choose from. Maybe your hunter is part demon or something, I don't know. Maybe they're a vampire. The biggest issue with the character creator, as Capcom loves to include, is the character voucher system. For whatever reason, Capcom decided in the game you purchased, mind you, that you need to pay additional money to buy vouchers that will allow you to change the look of said character for anything deeper than the more superficial aspects. Want a new nose, or to adjust the face slightly? Better start shelling out dollars to Capcom. Now PC users, they may not have to worry about this, but modding the game to unlock certain paid features, or features locked away for events, has been noted to be against the rules and potentially suspendable. You wouldn't download a character voucher, right? Once your character and Palico are created, we get to watch them seamlessly enter into a cutscene within the game world. I can tell I'm saying seamlessly a lot right now. This game's all about being seamless, so. Now, before this, we see a scene of a character, Nata, being shepherded away by a member of his clan, the Keepers, as Arkfeld attacks. Arkfeld is the series' latest flagship monster, and will be known as the White Wraith for quite a while. Nata was the only member of his clan known to escape and traveled blindly through the Forbidden Lands before being found by an expedition. Now, we are part of a group looking to fully investigate these lands alongside our new handler, Alma, as well as an assortment of other hunting units, and our blacksmith, Gemma. During these scenes, players that have gone through the series prior may recognize Fabius as the Ace Lancer from Monster Hunter 4 and 4 Ultimate. Similarly, Gemma is the grown-up version of Little Miss Forge, but that only gets hinted at for a while before being outright stated by Nadia and maybe some others later on. Monster Hunter Wilds may seem like a direct sequel to World, but thematically, it could be considered a successor to MH4 as well. Not only will we see returning characters from that entry, similar to when we saw the Ace Cadet or Aiden in World, but major aspects of the previous game's storyline like Frenzy will make a return as well. Still, Wilds overall is more akin to World, with its focus on exploration and discovered uncharted territory, similarly to the expeditioners or numbered fleets that trudge through the New World. Instead of fleets in the New World, we now have units in the Forbidden Lands. Alma, Gemma, and our hunter are part of the Avis unit, while Olivia, Eric, and Werner are part of Astrum, and there are multiple others around as well. The focus of Wilds is twofold, exploring the Forbidden Lands while searching for Nata's community, and the hunt for the White Wraith that attacked it. Through this, we see a lot of discussion surrounding the ecosystem and even the weather, and how certain monsters can affect this. There's a lot of work put in to bring the story of Wilds front and center, potentially the most it's ever been, even compared to World. It's an odd decision considering the series is well known to barely focus on these aspects, and so you'd expect it to be one of the best yet. Otherwise, it would potentially detract from the game itself and flop, leading to two major issues with the game as a whole. Well, I'm afraid to say that the story really does seem to fall flat this time around. And while that would have been more excusable in older releases since we didn't care about it, Wilds constantly forces you to engage with the story, often preventing you from running ahead or participating in the hunt itself until you've completed a long walking segment full of exposition and dialogue. This happens almost every major assignment, and the game is very front-loaded with these in low rank before you begin the HR grind in high rank. I cannot express how excruciating it is to be ready to go out hunting and spend half of your time on your Seikret, the new mount in the game, taking in all of your surroundings over and over again until they finally decide to actually let you play the game. Don't get me wrong, I love a good cutscene. I'll play games with hours upon hours of cutscenes within them, but that's never been the Monster Hunter experience until now. Maybe with World, but even worse here, it's not what I want in my hunting series where I go out over and over again to fight countless monsters. At the very least, if it was a cutscene, I could skip it to get right into the action, but no. The funny thing is that you were not able to skip cutscenes in World. I think you maybe still can't, but a mod was made to allow you to. Now you can skip cutscenes, but they also added these unskippable walking segments. It's like the monkey paw curling all over again. We'll talk about those interruptions to the game itself in a bit, but I do want to focus more on the story now since it has become so integral to the development of the game, namely that I can't stand it. Not just due to the limiting factors, but more so due to the repetitive nature of every story beat with a cast of characters I am personally not particularly fond of, especially Nata. I don't dislike Nata as an individual. I don't hate him, similar to how people seem to online, or how people hated the Handler in World. But I truly think the game is at its best when he isn't the focus of the storyline. And that's not Nata's fault. In reality, it's more accurate to say Capcom shafts his growth whenever they can. They want two different things that are colliding with one another constantly. Nata is the catalyst for everything that happens in the first half of the game. You would expect him to be the character we see the most growth out of, and we do to an extent. An inexperienced child, the idea seems to be to experience the wonders of the Forbidden Lands through his eyes. You are Nata in the sense that neither of you have really seen anything here before. You're lost, and slowly learning all there is to learn and experiencing all there is to experience. And through that, you would think there would be big strides into his character development, especially since the actual insert for the player, the Hunter, is now a fully voiced protagonist, incredibly experienced, and seems to have their own developed personality and vague history with the guild. If anything, it feels like Nata was only added to the storyline in order to make up for the fact that you are no longer your Hunter. And while we see Nata change throughout the storyline, we rarely see reasons for this change to happen. Multiple times, Nata will be in position to show us how what he is learning and experiencing is allowing him to grow, showing him ready to make tough decisions, and then the Hunter is always there to take the responsibility off of his hands. These moments in the story should be showing us why Nata changes and grows, but Capcom seems more interested in showing off the power fantasy that is our Hunter in a game notorious for not being about power at all, but rather how small and weak we are in comparison to the gods of nature that we fight against. It's conflicting goals in a mediocre storyline. It's these types of things that make the storyline feel like it's lacking in impact. It's what mainline Monster Hunter games seem to continuously show us, despite Monster Hunter stories often showing they are capable of providing something more real, more substance. Instead, while dangerous monsters are afoot, there is rarely anything actually on the line. Sure, apparently people die, but these are irrelevant characters from the core storyline, and often off-screen, meaning we are told about it and not shown. I don't need character death to make something compelling, but people rarely even get hurt aside from Zato, a character we meet later on in Kunafa Village. We'll see examples of what I meant with Nata as we discuss the storyline further, but at the moment the Hunter is meeting with their team, and the first thing they notice is the Seikret carrying a young girl who is being chased by a pack of one of the new monsters in the game, Balahara. This is generally how you will always be introduced to a new monster in the game. Previously, in most Monster Hunter games, a new quest would unlock a new monster and you would go and hunt it. Sometimes there would be cinematic elements to the introduction, but not always. Now, every creature introduced is part of the storyline, and the player has to be guided to it. You rarely know what monster you are up against in the first half of the game until it's too late, and they can get away with that for two reasons. One, because the game is very easy, and two, because there are pop-up camps that allow you to switch out equipment and items for any given situation. It used to be a rare occurrence for a monster you weren't expecting to jump out at you. The introduction of Zinogre in Portable Third as an example. Now every monster is like that at first, meaning that the game about preparing for the next hunt isn't really about that until the latter half of it. Monster Hunter Wilds is about this cinematic experience, constantly trying to throw things at you without giving you the opportunity to prepare, but still walking you along for storyline beats where you can't do anything except gather items and take in the sights. It feels so against what Monster Hunter was originally about. And while there are more action-oriented segments, such as the beginning here with the Balahara, and later more Balahara, these are extremely few and far between. Hell, I may have just mentioned the only 2 action segments that exist. Everything else is you just taking a tour of the various maps multiple times. This initial segment is our first interaction with the game's new mount known as a Seikret. Sekrets are somewhat like Palamutes from Monster Hunter Rise, but with less freedom of mobility. That's not saying much considering Rise was all about letting you climb mountains and soar through the sky. Wilds is more grounded in this respect, but the Seikret can glide in the air and climb areas that the hunter would normally be able to climb themselves, just faster. More convoluted areas are turned into semi-on-rail experiences where the Seikret hops from platform to platform with very little player input. While the Palamute was a rather fluid experience, the Seikret was notorious at first for being difficult to control, so much so that guides had to be made where individuals would explain which settings to change in order to make the mount handle better. This is mostly due to the new auto-pathing system. Sekrets are designed to act as guides. By setting a waymark anywhere, the Seikret will taxi you to it, again without any input from the player. However, when trying to manually control the Seikret during these moments, it can feel as if you are fighting against it. It feels terrible, and I can only assume they defaulted to this setup because they didn't trust the player to be able to find their way around. Understandable, since most of the areas can be pretty dense despite the more open environments presented in the first maps. Luckily, these settings can be changed. Auto Explorer can be turned off, and the mounted controls can be set to a different profile where you have more authority over the Seikret, which is how the game probably should have had it to begin with. It's fine at that point, nothing to write home about, but at least it controls well. That's not where the main problems arise though. On the positive side of things, the Seikret makes traversing the larger maps more bearable, probably a necessary inclusion as the game's environments grow larger with each release. I personally think mounts should be removed entirely, but that would require changing maps to be smaller and more easily traversable on foot. Maps and mounts are sort of built off of one another. If you remove one, the other suffers and needs to be changed as well. It's sort of a foregone conclusion that the bigger the map gets, the more necessary some form of transportation becomes, and we first saw this in World as it experimented with auto-pathed mounts found in the field, and then more to fruition with Palamutes in Rise. I do like the open nature of some of the maps now since they really needed that, but don't need them to be so large. Have you seen the size of the Windward Plains? If you don't have the right pop-up camp set up, you are going to ride the Seikret from point A to B for what feels like 5 minutes of nothing happening. And yeah, you can set up pop-up camps to fast travel to, but I don't think that's a real fix. I think that's a band-aid to a greater problem. I've explained before that I do not find fast travel inherently bad, but I do think the game should better incentivize you not to use it, rather than make it the de facto means of getting around. You can even do it mid-fight in most scenarios. Why would I want that? It just cheapens the already piss-easy fights in the game. That's not all that cheapens them though. The Seikret makes you nigh invincible in combat due to being able to pick you up whenever you get knocked back down. Very rarely the Seikret can get knocked down with you, but more often than not, you will find yourself falling over and whistling for them to come pick you up off the ground before anything can happen to you. Add on to that items can be used while mounted, they act as a portable springboard for mounting attacks, and the Seikret might as well be a 15th weapon in the game. It was bad enough when we could drink potions while moving, but now we basically own a portable camper van that lets us do everything we need to on the go. And if we run out of items, just fast travel back to camp and restock because there's no real challenge or sense of commitment anymore. That's really what sucks about these games now, zero commitment. Mess up an attack and get knocked over, who cares? The Seikret has you. Need to drink a potion but can't stand in place because you'll get hit? Cool, just walk out of the way or use your mount. No items, go grab some in the middle of a hunt. What's the point anymore? Is that all this game is now? I just go in and wail on something that can barely fight back, mashing the same button over and over again until it's dead. I don't even need to look at the screen half the time. I got a show on the other monitor and watch that while playing because I'm so bored. Boo! There rarely is ever a time where you will not have your secret, and before I get those don't like it, don't use it arguments, which I've talked about before in previous videos and I hate, it's hard to not use mechanics that the entire game is designed around. Potion drinking used to be a stationary animation that you committed to, and now I can stand in place with the new potions as well. The issue is that it is a longer process in World and Wilds than it was previously, so you are limiting yourself even further than what any of the games intended. It's the same with the Seikret. If you don't use it, getting from point A to B is going to take forever. In fact, some surfaces are only traversable by Seikret, so you have to have it at all times anyway. Further, mechanics like weapon swapping and supply items are tied directly to it. It's a staple of Wilds that you have to make use of to play the game as intended, and attempting to not use these mechanics is too limiting. So you wouldn't be finding as much enjoyment as an old school experience because it wouldn't feel right. Similar issues with pop-up camps. The game is designed around fast travel. It's designed around you restocking items and changing weapons. That's the direction the series has been moving since World. And it's just so against everything the series once was. I can accept change, I have accepted change and enjoyed every Monster Hunter up to including GU with minimal criticisms of the game's direction, but this feels like a complete design shift of the philosophy of the series. Monster Hunter World onwards are games that want to be Monster Hunter but aren't, just like all those games I mentioned earlier. It fits in the genre, but it's not really meeting the quality of the originals. Feels like a knockoff more than anything else. Upon saving the girl, she lets us know that her brother was being attacked by another monster. With the on-rails segments done, we can now choose what weapon we want to play with and begin our first hunt against a Chatacabra. Chatacabra is one of the biggest pushovers in the game, so it makes sense for it to be our introduction into the hunting process. The first thing you may realize is that we are able to track any and all monsters that appear on the map regardless of if we have found them before or not. You may think that this is just due to going through the glorified tutorial segment, but no, this is how the game works from now on. Every new hunt is introduced through the story, and then further hunts will tell you exactly where the monster is at all times. Scout flies are just there to guide you now, and tracking has been fully removed in any way that matters. I had my own issues with the tracking in World, but instead of fixing that, both Rise and Wilds seem to have abandoned the idea altogether. Even though tracking has been around in some capacity since the original games. Paintballs were originally used for marking the target, so you would always see it on the map for, well, a limited amount of time. Otherwise, you would never know where the monster was unless you used a Psycho Serum, or through some combination of these over time, you began to recognize and understand its travel paths. That was part of the fun. By hunting something enough, you, the player, not the character through some stat or whatever, would gain a better understanding of where to find it on future endeavors. It was a rewarding aspect of the gameplay loop that felt like you were growing in experience as a hunter. And now we have nothing like that. It's so funny watching the game try to make getting you into the hunt as fast as possible their focus, but then still bottleneck you with storyline segments. It really has no idea what it wants to be anymore. Just an amalgamation of features designed entirely around selling copies instead of creating a cohesive product. The hunt itself isn't anything really, but what initial hunt is. The Chatacabra is a creature you can absolutely decimate, and while some monsters will be a bit harder, I have some bad news. This is going to be a trend moving forward through pretty much the entire game. I'd say monsters like Gormagala and Seregios later on offer a bit more of a challenge due to their speed and mechanics, but they are few and far between. Remember when I said this was a glorified tutorial? Well, that might more accurately describe the entirety of a low rank. Your first 10 hours or so of the game are spent with it slowly trying to teach you the ropes while you already know the ropes. You probably made the ropes. You own and operate an entire goddamn rope factory. However, a lot is thrown at you in this initial hunt. You'll learn how to mount your Seikret in battle, how to use your selected weapon, and how to utilize wounds and other minor features through this hunt and the next few onward. Wounding isn't new to Wilds, but how it acts as a mechanic is. Monsters now gain wounds as you repeatedly attack a spot on their body. By attacking a newly formed wound, you will deal extra damage regardless of if it is an effective spot for your weapon or not. To be blunt, the system is too strong, ridiculously so. Wounds form so quickly on so many spots on so many monsters that you are constantly dealing boatloads of damage to a creature without ever having to move. This is because damaging a wound enough can break the wound and cause the monster to potentially pause for a moment, meaning there are even more openings now at your disposal. Additionally, when you break a wound, you gain a monster part. Usually a less rare or specific item, but a part nonetheless. So you will be raking in parts after parts every hunt while demolishing your target over and over again. But that's not all. The wound system isn't some standalone thing, rather it goes hand in hand with the game's new focus system. Focus is the ability for you to aim at specific locations on the monster's body while in the middle of a hunt. Think aiming down the sights of your bowgun, but also with melee weapons. It really adds little to some weapons, if any at all, but when combined with the wound system, focus suddenly springboards itself into the most overpowered mechanic in the game, and maybe the series. Hitting a wound with a focus strike will perform a special attack that will stop any action the monster is taking momentarily and then destroy the wound right away with big damage. So it's a real get out of jail free card for a lot of situations when hunting, especially with multiple people. You can essentially keep a monster pinned down and open to attacks over and over again. It doesn't stop there though, weapons may get further bonuses off of the attack. Longsword, as an example, gets spirit levels for each broken wound, and sometimes you can break multiple wounds with a single focus strike. So you can raise multiple levels of your spirit gauge instantaneously for free with no drawbacks whatsoever. Incredible. What is the point of that? What is the mechanic actually adding to the experience for you other than making you feel even more powerful than you did before? Is that all this game is now? A power fantasy? One lacking any type of struggle whatsoever until maybe reaching the arc-tempered monsters, maybe? Most of them are pushovers too. Even worse, tempered monsters have wounds that glow blue when focusing, and breaking these seems to guarantee an entire topple, further trivializing everything within the hunt itself. It just didn't need to be added. Each Monster Hunter entry doesn't need to make us more and more ridiculously powerful. Why would you want that? Where's the fun and challenge in that? This system of being so mobile on both land and air makes it impossible to impose real difficulty on the monsters you face aside from a select few, due to their speed and unconventional movesets. It's very rare to run into a monster in this game that you can't just total without thought. Alongside that, weapons continue to get redesigned, simplified, and strengthened for the hunter. I can't speak on every weapon, but there have been similar complaints for some and not just longsword. However, since I have the most experience with longswords, I want to touch on how much worse they made the weapon overall. Originally, longsword was a weapon with an infinite combo you would perform by alternating two different buttons. If you managed to hit the enemy enough, it would fill up your spirit gauge, leading to various bonuses. This later turned into spirit levels and raised those levels using the spirit roundhouse combo. There was one way to raise your spirit levels for some time with a few caveats like GU. This meant that, while one of the faster melee weapons, longsword was still pretty limited in what it could do, and expected you to commit to combos that you could only really get out of through rolling, but more regularly by using the Fade Slash. The Fade Slash was the main tool you had to get away properly out of a combo, and as the game evolved, you could even perform spirit combos out of a Fade Slash to make them faster, improving the use cases. A simple weapon with a cool gimmick, one that annoyed a lot of players due to its size and ability to trip, but it rewarded users for learning how to master it to the point that you could get these big combos off regularly in order to maximize your spirit gauge bonuses. With the release of World, things changed, not just with the longsword, but many other weapons as well. The main difference for longsword was the inclusion of multiple counter mechanics. You had Special Sheath into EI Slash, and you also had Foresight Slash. Attacking out of Special Sheath and hitting the monster would also cause your gauge to charge over time. This became the main focus of the weapon, a complete shift from what it was previously. Those big combos you needed to commit to no longer matter, because if you were just about to be attacked, you could perform a Foresight Slash to get your next gauge level anyway. This is due to successful counters and follow-ups offering levels as a reward. It was easier than ever to be at your maximum output. There were a few downsides like losing your charge if you missed your Foresight, but you wouldn't even lose a level, so it barely matters. You could just fish for these constantly before wailing on the enemy some more. So it's already a different weapon with World in my eyes, and I never expected it to go back to how it was. Rise put its own spin on things with its own gimmicks, but it was more or less the same as World. This is the direction of the weapon. If I were in charge of this new development, my only real thoughts on how to make it more enjoyable would be to remove Yi Slash and make Fade Slash have iframes so you could follow up easier, but still need to commit to the combo in order to earn your gauge, just something that would require a bit more investment to master. But of course that didn't happen. Capcom doesn't want you to have to invest or commit to your attacks anymore. In fact, they want things to not only be easier, but make your rewards even more powerful. What if you didn't even need to counter anymore? What if you could just earn those levels by blindly attacking the monster until a wound showed up and then just destroy that? Then when destroying multiple wounds, you get multiple levels as well. How about a charged strike that gives you a level for free? How about a counter off of your Seikret, I guess? What if you were just always at Spirit level 3 forever? That's what it feels like now. All nuance has been gutted from the weapon. So rather than building off of these counters or finding a way to make them more impactful, they took the new counter weapon and gave you multiple new abilities to raise your levels without them, invalidating the use of counters outside of trying to get out of jail when being attacked by a monster. More casually, counters felt like such a waste to perform when I could just slot in earplugs and then wail on the monster's wounds, charge up my attack, or perform my spirit combo, which is now much more mobile as you can move during it. Countering basically feels dead to me. Is it optimal? I don't know. Maybe it's still optimal to counter everything and then perform a Helm Breaker, but it sure as hell doesn't feel like it. Speaking of Helm Breaker, the only real reason to use that seems to be to feel flashy. Originally, you would have launched into the air and then landed on the monster to deal multiple hits of damage in succession. And the cost for this was the loss of a spirit level. That meant you had to perform a counter or a full spirit combo to get it back. Now, you have a follow-up that, if performed, means you lose 2 levels, and it's flashy and the damage numbers are fun to look at, yada yada, but I rarely if ever felt the need to perform this move. The reason is that, at level 3, the normal LS combo changes to a faster, more powerful attack sequence you can perform just by mashing the attack button. This is so effective, it felt to me as though it trumped the need to do anything else. You may be saying, well, just use the other mechanics then if it's that boring, but that's not the point. The previous entries of the series did not have this problem. It used to be about having to use everything at your disposal to survive. Why should a game designed around complex weapon movesets and the interplay between moves also contain a simple button mashing combo that's fully viable, if not actively optimal? That's like the definition of bland and boring. The majority of the playthrough for me was the odd counter here and there, but mostly just destroying wounds, raw dogging spirit combos as I zip around the enemy, and then mashing a single button and maybe a spirit combo over and over and over. And then when my gauge ran out, I'd just break another wound and be right back at the top, over and over. This is another aspect of how Capcom trivialized the game, the monsters, the interactions, everything. You don't even lose buffs when you cart. If the monster somehow does cart you, you retain any food buffs, demon drugs, etc., and weapon charges and gauges as well. I could get carted at Spirit level 3 and then still be at Spirit level 3 with all my other buffs as well. No danger, no challenge, no nothing. It's a far cry from what the series once was and what it once offered, not just an example of changes being made with time. I can accept change, but how do you accept the complete gutting of the series in terms of criticism? Do I think Monster Hunter Wilds is a fine game overall? Sure. There's enough meat on the bone to be a fun action hack and slash, but is it a good Monster Hunter game? It's really hard to say it is at the moment. I don't think I've ever been as bored in a hunt as I have been in this entry because there's zero friction. The main storyline in Low Rank focuses on us exploring various locations within the Forbidden Lands as we search for Nata's lost clan. Through this, we meet multiple other civilizations and learn about how they survive in this environment. By saving the brother and sister from the Balahara and Chattacabra, we get introduced to the people of Kunafa village, and also to our base camp, which gets constructed nearby. Each major area will have a base camp for us to explore and operate out of. Here we can forge equipment, buy supplies, and see other hunters while not on a quest. You have your item shop, smithy, and support ship. The support ship is a returning mechanic where we can send them off to gather supplies for us and then buy those supplies with research points. You can get random monster parts, random consumables, and more, but it's fairly limited and acts more as a bonus. It's just something to look forward to as it returns every few hunts or so. There's an ingredient center here as well, but this isn't where you eat since you can make food on the go or at your camp. Food is on a timer now within Wilds. You can eat one meal and keep those bonuses over multiple hunts, and since you don't lose anything when carded, you'll probably forget all about this until you run out and your maximum HP decreases. Never fear though, as you can just make another meal in the middle of battle whenever you want. In previous games, you would need to eat before every meal in order to gain an extra advantage. This meant you needed to have the funds or ingredients to do this regularly. You still use ingredients here, and the ingredient center may supply rations and later other ingredients periodically, but it feels as though you have now lost yet another of per hunt preparations. Within base camp, you can also find the support desk. Here you can read the latest news about the game, claim downloadable content, and purchase new DLC as well. Additionally, you can manage all your pop-up camps from here and claim bounties for rewards. On initial release, bounties were more limited, and as updates came out, new categories were added for daily/limited tasks you could complete, making it easier to receive rewards or giving a player more to do in the form of dailies. Why you would want dailies in a Monster Hunter game is beyond me, but here we are. Similarly, the pop-up camps changed a bit as well. In Wilds, they were always fast travel points that allowed you to restock or change equipment while out in the field, but the limit for how many you could have in a given area was raised in updates as well. I mentioned this previously, but camps feel even less purposeful than in World, and the new mechanics of them being in dangerous areas and in need of repair due to monster attacks is something you will hardly ever engage with. If it does happen, you just spend points to repair things and you'll always have enough points to do so. At the very least, with the limited slots, you had to consider what key points around the map you would want to travel to, and you had to discover those points by doing a little manual exploration as well. While it's still true that you need to unlock these, you can place so many camps around the map that getting anywhere on Seikret feels more like a chore. Villages have small functionality as well. Sometimes you may be offered a meal with the villagers that will give you greater bonuses than a normal one, and other mechanics may be found there as well. Oil Well Basin, for example, has azus, and the festival ores you can collect every so often that are used for various purposes. You can even meet specific individuals in these villages to trade with, so you'd think it would benefit you to visit these locations often, kind of like a farm. However, as the story progresses, Nata will become a village intermediary, and all of those functions will be consolidated into talking to him at the base camp. He basically functions as the farm of this game, letting you select a category for each village and then filling up each category with resources over time. Farms continue to be more and more streamlined with each entry. The charm of visiting a farm and tending to it over time has been removed completely for quite a while, and now, reduced to the mere act of chatting with a non-thematic NPC, this is even further reduced in Wilds. The base camp feels as though it's just there to serve its purpose. It never evolves in a way that you would appreciate like some of the other entries. There isn't even any player housing for you to customize. I would have expected that in title updates, but it never showed, so maybe in the expansion? It's just a means to an end. You hit up the base camp after every quest, grab your stuff, and move on. You could not visit it for extended periods of time depending on how you play, and you wouldn't feel like you were missing out on anything. Speaking of title updates, the Guild Hall or Grand Hub in this entry wasn't even available in the base game. It had to be added after the fact for whatever reason. Does that sound like a feature that should have been added after the fact to you? Something that is a staple in every game that you now had to wait for through these updates for what feels like no reason in particular. Why wouldn't you just have this in the finished product? Regardless, similar to bases, the hub acts as a meeting point for a large assortment of hunters. It was added in the first title update for the game and included multiple features, with one of those being arena quests. Yes, even arena quests weren't available from the get-go. Do you see the trend here? Things you expect to be in this fully priced, released game are surprisingly, suspiciously missing with the promise that they will come later. Why? I would rather wait for the release to have everything it's supposed to, especially staples from previous entries, than complete the game and be expected to return to it so I can actually see all the content just to boost the analytics and sales of Capcom for some executive. It may feel like I am beating a dead horse, but every time we find something new, the first thing that comes to my mind is, why wasn't this in from the get-go? And I think we all know why. All seasonal events change the aesthetics of the hub, and there's a bowling minigame you can take part in to gain some resources. I really don't care for it, and it's also been improved over time. Various bowling setups for season events, the ability to use 10 tickets at once to speed up earning rewards, and an update that finally allows you to play again straight from the rewards menu. There are also special seasonal meals to eat here and villager meals that you can share with various players, helping you feel like you're back in the good old days where the game was about interacting with others in more meaningful ways. Use a voucher to give everyone a free premium meal as an example. The hub also offers the return of a diva, who will sometimes show up to sing and provide a stat boost for you if you stay to listen. I miss things like that. That's a great addition, and I hope we continue to see her return with new releases. It's a fun way of spending time in the hub more casually, hanging out with other players while still offering a reward for doing so. The Squad Information Center also gets moved here once the hub is unlocked. Squads are a new mechanic where you can create your own or join others. By being part of a squad, you can join member-only lobbies and send persistent messages to each other, but that's about it. It's like a small community edition that doesn't do much, but hey, it's there and it's not hurting anyone. Feels like a purely good addition to me that I would be interested in seeing more fleshed out without limiting content to needing to be in a squad as some games do. Again, the Grand Hub is great on its own. Looking at it as just a feature of the game, there's nothing to be unhappy about in my mind. The issues arise from the fact that we didn't have it on release when we really should have. It's a staple of the series. It's expected in each release, and I promise that Capcom realizes this. They understand that this is an expectation and chose not to add it right away anyway. So again, ask yourself why you think that is. Why was a game like Wilds left unfinished and then completed over the course of a year? Why are you playing the early access experience without it being called early access? Back at base camp for the first time, we can learn a little more about Olivia and her team, which handles special assignments as she puts it. Olivia, Eric, and Werner mirror our own team of the Hunter, Alma, and Gemma. We get a better introduction for them once we reach the Scarlet Forest, and Gemma will even ask them if they are an ace team, further alluding to her being Little Miss Forge, as she dealt with an ace team often in Monster Hunter 4. Although it's suggested that they have more experience overall as a unit, both the Hunter and Alma are considered accomplished in their own ways, and Gemma has her own rich history as I just mentioned. Similar to World, the game has a big focus on the idea that you are part of a larger group of an expedition, another cog in the machine, a tool that hunts monsters. Through that, Olivia's team acts as an example of another group similar to your own, and this also plays into the idea of support hunters and specifically the hunt against Gogmazios way later on. In a few quests, Olivia will fight alongside you to give you a taste of what support hunters are like if you haven't utilized the mechanic yet. Support hunters are new to Wilds. An old mechanic from World, the SOS flare, returns and is used to allow you to change a solo assignment into a drop-in multiplayer one. By shooting off the flare, you are allowing people to see your hunt when searching and to join it. You can make it so people automatically join when they register, or you have to manually accept them mid-hunt. Manually accepting can be annoying. I don't recommend it. However, there is a reason some players do that, and it's for the support hunters. When you shoot an SOS flare and open up your quest, you will first get the hunt populated by NPC hunters that will fight alongside you. These hunters are useful, but not as effective as real players who know what they are doing, especially since the monster's HP still scales to multiplayer values. The upside is that you get more people on your team during a hunt, which takes some of the monster aggression away from you. And support hunters don't count towards your knockout total when carded, making them essentially invincible. It's like having an entire team of palicos fighting alongside you. Which hunters you get at first seem to be random from a pool of potential NPCs you'll see walking around the base camp from time to time. That's by default, and I believe you can instead choose manually who you want to bring along if you desire. However, characters like Fabius and Nadia also become available during seasonal events after you progress enough. One issue you may see players complain about is how the UI design of the SOS system is a bit confusing. Players will often turn on manual accept, so they keep support hunters and don't have them replaced with real people. After all, real players can cost you lives and support hunters can't. However, this causes an issue where your hunt gets listed in the SOS search and someone tries to join it only to have to wait for you to manually accept it, and you never do, wasting their time. I even did this for a while before I realized you can change the SOS settings to support hunters only. The UI in Monster Hunter games has always had its odd features that leave players scratching their heads. Menus and menus and menus, and information that may be important not being readily available. Some updates even add additional clicks or button presses to menus that didn't have them before for seemingly no reason. I'm not surprised it bothers people often, and I'm not surprised they may not realize they are entering a manual accept SOS before selecting it. My real issue is with how busy everything is. You could argue that that has always been the case, especially with how large the health and stamina bars used to be, something I enjoyed. Add on to it that the map used to be on screen at all times. I definitely see how one could consider that busy. However, it's still leaps and bounds more alluring than whatever we have going on here. I feel like I'm looking at a mobile game or some sort of free-to-play multiplayer experience. Luckily, many elements can be turned off in the settings, such as the weapon combos that usually appear in the top right, which I have had off since release. So it can be even more cluttered by default, throwing way too much info at the player way too often. Hard to complain too much about it since things can be disabled, but I will say I appreciated it when that wasn't a necessity, when everything sort of fit together, such as the clock being attached to the health and stamina bars, or the map showing me the entirety of what I was exploring instead of a mini-map compass design we got going on now. Things felt more cohesive before in my eyes, but there's not much to dwell on really. The point I'm making is that the clutter can be fixed to a point, sure, but the character and charm are gone completely. The colors and unique designs per game have been replaced with these black, flat, minimalist designs. And while Rise sort of reverted to an older style, World and Wilds are clearly going in the opposite direction. Once we are introduced to everyone, the goal becomes clear: find the Keepers and learn more about the White Wraith that attacked them. To do so, the lands need to be explored. Through that, we can meet the various settlements to learn more about them and see if they have any clues as to what is going on. Unfortunately, some of the villagers, namely Zato, are fairly cautious of outsiders and won't allow us access to the village to learn more. Zato leaves for a time, and this allows us to visit the village, and we notice chimes made from local crystals which help keep the monsters away. Known as gem chimes, they make sounds that sound like the local apex monster which the other creatures fear. Unfortunately, the local village elder doesn't know about the Keepers, but she does inform us of the Sand Tide, where a large flying wyvern is known to appear, and recommends we seek shelter. They also spend an overly large amount of time showing us eating some of the village's local food at a dinner we were invited to. This is a big focus in Wilds, learning about the cultures and traditions of the villages found within the Forbidden Lands, and while that is interesting in a way, it's used to really fluff the amount of time we spend in between hunts within low rank. A large portion of our time is spent visiting these places, talking to the villagers, and learning more about them, something we didn't do as much in the older games. You may enjoy that, but to me, someone that wants to prepare for the next hunt as soon as possible, these distractions are far too often for my liking, especially all of the Seikret walking segments that are tied to them. However, these scenes aren't useless by any means. They help form the direction we will take throughout our adventures here. If we didn't visit the village, Yisai may have never informed us of a local forest nearby, or that Doshagamon used to reside there and never venture out into the plains. This suggests there's something odd going on with the ecology and acts as a hint to what we are searching for while giving us a new location to explore. So it's not a worthless endeavor by any means, and many players may enjoy this larger focus on the story that I don't. It isn't inherently bad, but it's not what I look for in my Monster Hunter experiences. This may be a minor complaint, maybe nitpicky, I admit, but I have to say I really hate the dialogue during those scenes that aren't quite a cutscene. Basically just when everyone is standing around talking. Namely, I hate the brief pause that takes place in between each NPC's line. You'll have Alma say something, pause for 2 to 3 seconds, and then someone will say something else before repeating the same pause. It feels unnatural and makes the conversations feel like they drag on. It's a weird decision, since you can manually move on to the next line of dialogue right away, so I'm unsure why they did this. Removing this pause would make dialogue feel a lot more natural. Now, I'm not going to hit every major story beat here, so let's be a bit more general for a while. Every area sort of operates the same way in terms of story structure. You make a base, meet the villagers, investigate issues surrounding the villagers, and then fight an apex. In Windward Plains, you meet the people of Kunafa and eventually hunt Rei Dao. In Scarlet Forest, you meet the Linian species known as the Woodwoods before fighting Uthaduna. In Oilwell Basin, you help the villagers there reignite their forge and then hunt New Udra. And while there is no village in Ice Shard Cliffs, you do run into Jin Dahad and have to repel it. More or less, it's the same thing over and over again. The specifics are what change a bit between all of these locations, and you'll go from exploring one back to exploring a previous location multiple times. Like, you'll need to hunt a Alpha Doshaguma eventually in Windward Plains, and it's when you first run into Rei Dao during Sandtide in the same map that you see the White Wraith for the first time. Alphas are a new mechanic added into Wilds, or rather Alpha Doshaguma is. As far as I am aware, it is the only alpha in the game. It's tied to the slightly more utilized pack mechanic introduced and featured heavily in trailers. In reality, these mechanics are few and far between, barely utilized at all. They feel like concepts made to boost the trailers shown off before the release of the game without telling players they basically dropped the mechanics altogether in development. I'm theorizing, of course, but you only hunt one alpha in the entire story, that being a Doshaguma, and you only run into like 3 packs of monsters as well: Doshaguma, Yankutku, and Kiribami. They even have new, more potent dung bombs to help disperse these packs, but here's the issue: you will almost never interact with these outside of the story. Besides them offering absolutely nothing unique outside of a regular hunt, packs just aren't that interesting at all. If I hunt a Hirabami and there are 2 other Hirabami that are bothering me, I can use a large dung bomb to disperse them and then go about my day. Or since the game is so easy, I can ignore them completely. What's the point? The real issue is that not only do these add barely anything outside of enticing players via trailers for the game, you will never even consider interacting with them when grinding. There was never a point in my 2 playthroughs where I actively went out and sought out packs or alphas because there is no reason to do so. Field surveys and free exploration is nice, but more often than not, you will be grabbing your quests from SOS flayers, or from listed optionals at the quest board / handler, the way God intended. There are quests to hunt multiple monsters, but I don't think I've ever seen one asking me to hunt a pack or alpha or anything special. And so I didn't. I only hunted what I needed or wanted to, and those never ended up being in packs. If you want to add some seasonal aspects to the game like Dose, and you want to introduce alphas, make those a bigger aspect of the non-storyline aspects of the game. Even Frenzy is more prevalent in my mind than these. Maybe make it so when you select an optional hunt, there's seasonal effects tied to the hunt itself or randomized. If I choose to hunt a Kongalala, maybe the hunt will change based on various factors to throw a pack at me without me realizing it, or make it an alpha without me realizing it. Maybe I need to account for these subtle differences when preparing, but that isn't the case at all. Why does the game feel so mismanaged in ways like this? From title updates introducing content that should already be there, to mechanics that were advertised but barely utilized. What's the point of all of that? I've had people suggest to me that executives rushed the game out against dev wishes, but I've never found solid proof of this statement, and I doubt that proof exists in any concrete fashion. However, one article does source Capcom's consolidated financial results for the 9 months of the fiscal year ending March 31st, 2025, pointing out that the release may have been timed to boost sales before the end of the fiscal year due to Capcom being behind on projected sales. It's a very probable reason for a lot of the issues presented here. If you ever need to ask yourself why a company would release a game like this in such an unfinished state, the answer is almost always going to involve keeping someone higher up happy and keeping money flowing. Regardless, you repeat the same story beats over and over until finally we see the White Wraith for the first time as it's sucking the energy out of a Rei Dao. This is where we first get some real development for Nata, or we would if they wanted to actually go along with that. Nata is an inexperienced child in a dangerous world where adults both understand the environment and put their lives on the line to protect others from monsters. He doesn't understand that yet, and the sight of Arkfeld pushes his emotions over the edge, causing him to attempt rushing the beast. Something like this ignorance and blind rage, seems like the catalyst to a lesson, that these are dangerous situations where people get hurt if they aren't prepared. This is something we even see in World. However, we never get anything like that here with Nata. Instead, nothing happens. Nata screams and throws a tantrum, but he never ends up being in any real danger. No one seems upset with him, no one gets hurt because of his actions, nothing changes. Nata is upset, but it is the hunter that will deal with it, and we will see that over and over again. Whatever Nata feels, whatever he wants to do, he can't, and we will always do it for him. We will always take on the tough hunts and answer the difficult questions ourselves because, despite the fact that Nata is supposed to be growing along this journey, we never give him the opportunity to. And then he grows anyway, which feels detached. You don't even talk to him after the hunt, he just sulks alone and then it's as if it never happened. When you hunt and defeat the oil well apex New Udra, a section of the ice map melts away, allowing you to access one of the final areas of the game, the ruins of Wyveria. Even the stubborn and obstinate Werner learns more of a lesson during the storyline here than we get to see from Nata at all throughout the game. Again, he does develop, but it is never really shown why. Within the ruins, we learn that the Keepers are still alive, although many have perished. Nata is reunited with his clan, but before that we are attacked by one of our first Guardian monsters, a Rathalos, though we do run into a Guardian Doshagama beforehand. Guardians are special versions of pre-existing monsters. We learn that they are man-made by an ancient civilization known as Wyveria, probably the closest reference to equal dragon weapon we will ever get within the series. Guardians have been waking up from their pods and terrorizing the local areas despite them supposedly being, well, Guardians, meant to protect and support Wyverians. Despite the intent, they attack anything and everything within their field of view, and we learn a bit more as to why that might be later on. Just to point out, while some of the Keepers may have died off screen, this is probably the closest you will ever get to hearing someone die or get hurt at all within Wilds. There is one side quest where a dude definitely got eaten or something, but no one ever seems to be in any actual danger. Compare this to stories where they are often willing to hurt or kill anyone for the plot, and you're left asking why that is. Unfortunately, I don't have an answer. The series has always played it safe in that regard. The older games gave you this sort of feeling through legends and the like while leaving your hunter slow and almost helpless. Through sweat and tears, you would persevere against monsters that you were told were dangerous and that felt the part, despite never seeing anyone actually die to one of them. The impact is lessened in the later entries because of how powerful our hunters have become. It's hard to take any monster seriously when you can virtually stunlock it to death with the game's intended mechanics. The environmental issues, potentially the issues with the Guardians, all of it seems to stem from Arkfeld breaking out of its Guardian mold and attempting to reintegrate into the ecosystem. It's not so much that it is just preying on the Keepers, but rather it is aggressive to all life and seems unable to satiate itself. Guardians don't need to eat, and they don't seem to die through normal circumstances. They survive through an energy source known as Wilk or Wyvern Milk, an artificial energy source able to control the weather. On our quest to reach the ruins, we also learn about the Landspine, another Wyverian creation that travels throughout the entire region, giving them their ability to control the weather. Nata gets reunited with the Keepers, and we learn more about Wyveria, namely how they were more technologically advanced than we could ever dream of. The creation of the Landspine and the Guardians, the gravity-defying rocks and the ice-shard cliffs, and their giant city in ruins prove that. The Keepers once researched Wyveria as their ancestors, but are now just people getting by, living off the Wilk and keeping clear of the Guardians. Nata has a monologue here discussing all he has seen in the outside world, life and creatures living to their fullest, the concept of true freedom within the ecosystem. In comparison, he seems disgusted by the idea of these man-made creatures, ones that have no need to reproduce or feed, creatures trapped here, locked off from the rest of the world. Arkfeld, in a way, yearns to break free of this mold and return to the world as a true monster. Understanding the wonders of the outside world, Nata seems to realize that all Arkfeld wants is to be free, and now only empathy and pity remain. This is one of the moments we actually see the process of Nata's growth in-game, see him behold the horrors of mankind and want to do better, to be better. Nata learns that his father's pendant has a unique function, but before we can learn more, we are attacked by Arkfeld and the hunter has to repel it for the time being. Arkfeld, despite being a guardian version of the extinct species, was feeding on prey, going against everything the Guardians were designed to be. This is unprecedented according to the head of the Keepers, Tashin, and he directs us to the Allharken in search of more answers. The Allharken is a Wyverian found past the ruins in the peaks of Suja, a village full of Wyverians. This is also where we unlock Melding for the first time. Melding is the process of turning old items into points so they can become new items, often randomized to some degree. Decorations in the game are earned randomly as you play, so you may never have what you need for a given build. Melding lets you sacrifice excess decorations for points and lets you choose specific level 1 decorations to create in their place. Once you hit HR 100, you can gain access to level 2 decorations as well, but anything higher remains randomly earned by completing hunts or by gambling points on unknown decorations at the melding pot. Relic and talisman melding work the same, although talismans are especially funny as the option to meld them, once again, didn't exist at release. Generally, a modern Monster Hunter game goes one of two routes. Either talismans are random and decorations are crafted, or vice versa. Talismans were craftable in Wilds, but they seem to change their mind and allow you to meld new, randomized talismans that have a chance of being leaps and bounds better than anything you could simply make. My personal preference is randomized charms and crafted decos, but what do I know? Overall, I like the melding pot for what it is and have since Monster Hunter 4 Ultimate. It's a good use of extra resources that you'll never have any need for, and most of the things you are spending these points on are randomized, so you aren't just getting everything you need/want outright. There's still some grinding and gambling to be had. Certain events may provide you with tickets that have huge point values, allowing you to meld in bulk from time to time, and these seem to be tied to bounties in order to get you to keep logging in and playing. So while melding is cool, how they use it to entice you to keep coming back is a bit exhausting. To get to Suja, the hunter has to repel a Jin to Hod. Once in Suja, you can finally find Poogie, who I'm sure people thought was cut again for this entry. Luckily, he's been here all along and has a new frog companion that latches onto his head. After finding the Alharkin, we learn a little more about Wyveria, and Nata becomes determined to learn what will happen to Arkfeld rather than to slay it. To Nata, he and Arkfeld are the same, both leaving their homes to experience the world in its entirety and grow from it. Something Nata gets to discuss and come to terms with, unlike a few other scenarios that feel like they happen more off-screen or have a cop-out, as we will see a bit later. Unfortunately, despite this lesson, the team informs Nata that they need to slay Arkfeld anyway, kind of making this realization a moot point. Despite wanting to watch Arkfeld and help it, the monster is beyond such notions and needs to be put down in order to save the ecosystem. Nata protests, even begs, but nothing comes of it. And we defeat Guardian Arkfeld finally, helping shepherd us into the end of the low rank storyline. This isn't the true end, however, as low rank has one more monster for us to deal with. The question is, why did Arkfeld come back here? Considering it's drawn to energy, it's theorized that the main energy source, the Dragon Torch, may have been its goal, meaning we need to find it to investigate. Sure enough, we find it, and there's a massive guardian that has taken it over, seemingly hibernating within it. Zoshia is the name of this beast, and the team tries to decide how to best deal with it, considering it could wake at any moment and be a danger to all of the Forbidden Lands. The main idea we come up with is disabling the Dragon Torch completely, and thus killing Zoshia while it is hibernating without the danger of waking it up. It's a hard pill to swallow, and I appreciate that the group even points out this may not be their choice as they are outsiders, and this could affect the ecosystem all over the Forbidden Lands, an ecosystem that the inhabitants have grown accustomed to. However, it's pointed out that Nata, a native of the land, has a pendant that could stop the Dragon Torch, putting the decision in his hands. This is what I was talking about earlier. This is a big decision for Nata based on his growth throughout the journey. It feels like it's meant to be a conclusion to everything he has experienced thus far. Nata seems to come to terms with this, understanding the consequences of destroying the Dragon Torch, but also saving everyone from the danger of Zoshia. He agrees to disable the creation and kill Zoshia in the process. Through this, Nata seems to be taking more responsibility within the group, a huge decision for him that he feels is necessary to protect those he cares about, even if it would disrupt the natural order and uproot the lives of everyone in the Forbidden Lands. It's a good scene, one that gets, in my opinion, completely devalued shortly after. Nata wants to see the Keeper's mission through, watching over the Guardians and protecting people from the dangers of the past. However, when he gets there, he struggles. You can see the doubt in him, as he tries to decide if what he is doing is best. But rather than us getting to see what decision Nata makes on his own, our hunter once again steps in to solve his problem for him. See, Nata doesn't need to make a choice at all. Since we have a superhuman hunter with us, why not just have them awaken Zoshia and kill it? A dangerous gamble, but one that would allow nothing to change and no consequences to arise. Despite his struggles and growth, we don't get to see how that growth comes to fruition within Nata with this major decision because Capcom needs you to hunt this monster, and so we might as well solve this the way we solve everything else. No, Nata doesn't need to decide anything ever. He's off the hook, there to just be someone that monologues throughout the storyline, but not once get to actually do anything, to show the strides he is making. It's a disservice to the character, and it makes me wonder why he was even there at all. If you want the hunter to solve everything so badly, just make the hunter the true main character rather than this random kid. The hunter has to make these decisions. Does the hunter destroy the dragon torch, or do they gamble on their own skill and attempt to hunt it? At least that way, it's all about what we would do in this situation, rather than taking this away from Nata. I was really disappointed with this aspect of the story. It feels like Capcom doesn't know what they want. They wanted a storyline focused on the growth of an individual as they explore the lands, but they still have everything solved by the hunter because that's who we play as. It feels like a cop-out, but it's more accurate to say this had to happen because they chose not to focus as much on our own hunter's development, making things feel off, and I don't know, I just groaned at the idea that we came all this way for Nata to make such an important decision, a climax to the storyline's themes of exploration and growth, of freedom and living within the ecosystem, of the people living there and how they make do, and nothing gets resolved internally for him because we take the reins. Well, rather, he does get his resolutions internally, but there's nothing to suggest why he does. Sure, we get to see him grow to understand Arkfeld, but we never really saw him appreciate the dangers of the real world, just the beauty, culture, and food. We got to see him put in a difficult spot, only to be given an out by our main character. We saw him wanting to see Arkfeld live, and later in High Rank, we will see how he now understands why Arkfeld needs to die, but nothing really changes for him to come to this conclusion. I just don't understand why we needed him here to begin with if Capcom wasn't going to utilize him. Regardless, the hunter awakens Zoshia and we have our final battle of High Rank. It's a pretty good one too, that we will talk a bit about later. What really gets me though is that this hunt was a one-time thing on release. Almost if not every Monster Hunter entry lets you hunt the final boss monster, get materials for gear, and then hunt it again later for more materials so you can make it set. Not this time, instead you fight Zoshia once, get no unique materials to it for any weapon or armor set, and then you can't fight it again until a title update where they finally gave it something. Just another example of the game feeling unfinished and as if it was missing content entirely and maybe purposefully. Even title update monsters like Laggy and Steve are considered to have been meant to be added in the original release, but something seemed to prevent that. Though from what I gather, that's a theory based on leaked material I won't be going over, so take it with a grain of salt. It's just so baffling. I still remember being baffled that I beat Zoshia and then couldn't hunt it after the fact, that I had no final boss gear to make until an update. It was bonkers to me because I expect more with the series based on its track record. Like, let me ask you something. Even if you and I, the viewer, you the viewer, me the super red, we don't agree about the direction of the series or like the direction it's taken. Don't you feel you deserve better for your money? Don't you feel you deserve a complete experience based on the experiences of previous entries that offered more? I get it, maybe you really like Monster Hunter, maybe you don't want to think ill of it, maybe you're so diehard that any criticism like does something to your brain. I don't understand it. But how will it ever get better if Capcom doesn't realize that these practices are unacceptable? Do you want to be blind and ignorant to it forever and just watch the series decline as they try to push these out faster and faster so that their numbers look better and better to executives? I don't. I think that's stupid. If I was asked to look at the story as any other Monster Hunter game, I'd say it does its job at trying to move the game's plot forward and that's it. But Capcom put a lot more emphasis on the storyline this time around and deliberately limited your actions and progression through its beats, many of which slow you down and prevent you from doing anything over and over with countless on-rail segments. Was the story good enough to warrant that? Hardly. What exactly was different here that made it so special to Capcom? World had a comparable story in my eyes, where nothing really happens other than exploring the land, hunting monsters, and dealing with bigger and larger threats while uncovering some sort of mystery as to what's going on. You fight like an alien. If you've never played World, you fight like an alien. It's not an alien, but it looks like an alien. It feels almost exactly the same, so why was it so important to make me pay attention to it this time with all of those exposition segments? Why is it that they are so focused on developing this child character, but seem to stifle his growth every step of the way because the player still needs to be the all-powerful hunter and only agent of change? At the end, Fabius receives the team's reports about what had happened in the Forbidden Lands. As time has passed, Nata seems to have grown into a hunter adjacent with new clothing signifying his growth. Unearned growth, mind you, but that's whatever at this point. The team has found a wyvern egg that has recently hatched. Arkveld's will to live has led to a new generation of the monster rising from extinction. Artificial life giving birth to natural life is quite the news, and we will see where that leads in high rank. Low rank in Wilds is brutal for this. It feels as though everything here was just the game holding your hand and walking you through incredibly easy content to teach you more and more about what you theoretically can do and where you can explore. It's an around 10-hour tutorial segment at best. You spend 10 hours having the game guide you before they finally say, okay, go out and do your own thing with high rank. Luckily, while the story may have kept us locked down for an extended period of time, high rank looks to continue providing plot points, but in a more freeform aspect you may be used to in older generations of Monster Hunter games. With low rank completed, our hunter rank unlocks, and that grind to raise it up will be what allows us to see new content on our own terms. With Guardian Arkveld and Zoshia defeated, things seem to have calmed down, but that doesn't mean there aren't issues to look into. In my eyes, this is where the real game starts and we actually get to start playing. Absurd, I know, but at least we are finally here. The team meets up with Fabius in the Windward Plains base camp as he has come to visit as an envoy of the guild. Nata meanwhile has decided to continue assisting Avis' unit, which is funny because he's almost completely written out of the storyline aside from one plotline surrounding Arkveld. After everything they tried to do with this kid, to sideline him seems crazy to me. Luckily, he at least has some use as the village intermediary where we can access our farm, trading with villagers, and more all in one place. I talked about this earlier. Since everyone is meant to just start investigating the lands now that the Dragon Torch has lost Zoshia, the game really opens up in terms of what we are allowed to do. With high rank unlocked, we can now freely hunt anything we want and sort of rework our way back up to being top of the food chain. Although I will say that low rank equipment will get you through a lot, as almost everything is a pushover until the title updates. We'll talk about the progression a bit later, so let's instead focus more on these newer story segments and what they brought to Wilds as a whole. One of the first things we do at this point in the storyline is explore areas we've already trudged through for differences after the Dragon Torch was messed with. This is also the first time you run into a high rank monster, and it's a pack of Yan Kukku. Again, you'll barely ever see this mechanic as you play because it is all smoke and mirrors for the game trailers preceding release. After the hunt, high rank environments are unlocked and allow seasons and monsters to shift outside of the storyline. You can even manually rest to change these features at camp. It's really where the game begins to open up, but we'll get there. There's not much to the story within high rank. It's more like a bunch of small branching plot paths to introduce various new features and monsters. Like you start doing side quests and title update missions to unlock Mizutsune, Steve, and Lagaya crews as an example. I'm not calling it what they call it in the game. They pronounce it so stupid. Really, this is the point in the game where you go and complete things at your own pace as your hunter rank is raised. At certain hunter rank checkpoints, you'll cap your rank momentarily as you are introduced to a new assignment. Completing every side quest in the game got me to a comfortable HR 85, so I only needed 15 more ranks to access all content the base game fully updated had to offer. Still, just grinding HR for the sake of it, even 15 levels, is probably my least enjoyed experience within Monster Hunter, and that's going all the way back to like 3 Ultimate. I never liked that. HR as a system has its uses, sort of. It's a way to limit the content players can engage with due to difficulty spikes. By forcing the player to clear more content, even grinding aimlessly, the hope is that they will be geared and experienced enough to take on those next challenges. Not that these are challenges in any real capacity, mind you. Not my preferred way of playing the game, but then again, I don't like taking human players along with me anyway. Can't trust randoms. I'm not acting holier than thou by saying this even, because you sure as hell can't trust me out there either. The main plot points to focus on here are running into Arkveld and Zoshia again, and the return of the Frenzy virus from MH4. Following that, we get the Gogmazio storyline, which is fairly self-contained. Okay, so Frenzy virus. If you never played Monster Hunter 4, the Frenzy virus was the staple mechanic of that game until the Ultimate Edition added its own key features. The frenzy virus makes monsters stronger, faster, and more wild, but at the cost of their health pool. So they are actually easier to kill in wilds over normal monsters. We saw a return of aspects of the virus in Sunbreak when Gore and Shigaru Magala joined the roster, but this is a more focused look at the concept. The reason? If you haven't figured it out yet, Wilds looks to be a direct reference / spiritual successor to Monster Hunter 4. Namely in a few of its returning features and characters. Fabius being the Ace Lancer, Gemma being Little Miss Forge, etc. So the focus on Frenzy is mostly just a callback to the previous games. We even get to fight frenzied monsters and eventually Gore Magala. Even the cutscene where Fabius joins us on the hunt is a direct reference to a scene in Monster Hunter 4 where he and his team get attacked. Later on, we get the return of Ace Gunner, known as Nadia now, and the ultimate monster from 4U, Gogmazios. It's a love letter to that entry in the series specifically, while still trying to do its own thing. However, that means there isn't much to bite into with these concepts. The Frenzy Virus has 1, maybe 2 hunts where you need to deal with frenzied monsters before you fight Gore Magala. Then after that, the storyline is basically complete, just a nod and nothing more. It's cool to have Gore Magala in the game, but that's really all it is. Another monster to the roster, and one that was just in Sunbreak, so it doesn't feel all that special. Similarly, the next major plot point is just us finding Arkveld again, pretty much out of nowhere it feels like. It's not a guardian this time around, but it still needs to be put down due to its aggressiveness and excess. However, before we even try to hunt it, the hunter and Alma look to Nata for the okay, and he seems surprisingly fine with it. He was so against killing the guardian Arkveld, and that never really felt like it got resolved in my eyes. Then he was so happy to see the species manage to survive through sheer will. Now you're okay with hunting the new fresh one that just hatched? Just feels like it's their way of tying up this storyline hastily with a, okay, he's cool with hunting anything now as long as someone gives him a reason. Really weird. That's pretty much the end of Nata's storyline for the rest of the base game. Additionally, this was the end of high rank before updates. Yeah, low rank had Zoshia and high rank had Arkveld again. Seriously? There's no build up to the storyline, no new boss fight to look out for. Even after killing Arkveld, there's no further epilogue scenes, just one moment of dialogue with the hunter, Alma, and Nata. And then the game is over. You're done all there is to do. It's so abrupt I felt like I had whiplash. I remember asking others if they felt the same, and one of my buddies was as shocked as I was. How is this the end? Why even release this if the game isn't finished yet? Why did I buy a game that was marketed as being complete if it wasn't? Look, I'm not completely against the concept of periodic DLC updates, but come on man, I have this game that should be a full experience before the updates, and it feels like it's over halfway through. You can't tell me you don't feel that. No Mizu, no Steve, no Laggy, no Zoshia fight after the first, no Gogmazios as the final hunt in high rank, nothing. Not even a second credits roll or anything. It just wasn't finished. It's so obvious. The writing is on the wall. Why do they think they can get away with that? Oh, well, probably because it sold 10 million copies, actually. Okay, that would kind of make sense, I guess. Maybe you shouldn't be so giddy about receiving such a half-baked experience. I don't know. My favorite storyline focuses on Gogmazios, and was added in the final big title update before we're going to get the next expansion. At least I'm assuming it's the final one based on their current roadmap. It feels like a culmination of all of the Monster Hunter 4 references up until now, bringing with it not only Gogmazios, but Nadia as well. It's also the only storyline that feels like there's actually anything on the line. Characters like Olivia, Werner, and Fabius all have major roles to play, and Olivia especially gets put into a situation where she would have perished if not for the timely arrival of the Ace Gunner. Having found a new location under Azuz, the team stumble upon the nexus for wyvern milk that pumps the energy wherever it needs to go through the channels known as the Wormways. However, while investigating it, the team stumbles upon a sleeping Gogmazios, a black elder dragon and one of the bigger ones the games have seen. Gogmazios terrorized players in Monster Hunter 4 Ultimate and now returns in Wilds. Elder dragons are dangerous, sure, but some are more terrifying than others. Iceborne put a great amount of effort into emphasizing how dangerous a Fatalis is supposed to be, and the fight really lived up to that legend in my eyes. Similarly, they tried to do the same here, although I find the fight itself falls flat in that regard. Regardless, the fact that there is a Gogmazios here is enough to cause everyone to panic. You can't just leave it alone due to the terrifyingly destructive power it wields. So a plan needs to be made, and it will include the help of every unit in the Forbidden Lands. What follows is a brief set of conversations discussing preparation, along with Werner mentioning that he knows Nadia, although he is dismayed at her arrival due to being scared or uncomfortable around her. She's just that intimidating. I really enjoyed how terrifying they made this sleeping beast seem, and it's true, Gogmazios is something that requires even more planning and effort than Xochitl. Fabius feels the need to call in Nadia because she, along himself, are some of the only hunters who have experience against one. There's hints here and there that some of the other hunters do as well, including one guy, Griffin, who seems to be the voice actor for Ogden in the New Stories game. There hasn't really been such a feeling of all types of hunters coming together in such a large group since the Fatalis storyline and world. It's such a breath of fresh air to see other hunters actively participating even in the hunt itself, rather than solely our superhero hunter that can do anything solo. Even the typical support hunters aren't enough, and the hunt will require more than the 3 you can normally have due to how massive the fight is. It's a set-piece fight, and I'll discuss more about what that means when we look into the mechanics properly. Once the hunt is complete, congratulations are in order, but there isn't much fanfare as I would have personally liked. However, you can talk to many of the individuals that participated for some extra dialogue and information/insight, even getting to better know Griffin and Nightmist. Typically, I'd look at the mediocrity of a Monster Hunter storyline and not give it much thought. After all, the games generally do not focus as much on said storyline as they do the gameplay and mechanics. However, as storylines became more of a focus in World and Wilds, we're sort of forced to consider them part of the package. They got away with it before because the story didn't really get in the way of the game. Now, the story looks to prevent you from playing the game at every turn for the first 10 hours or so. With that in mind, was this change of focus worth it? Was the plot so good it justified interrupting me from the game itself? Not even close. The game's focus on showing off its large environments and the villages surrounding it ends up detracting from them by stopping you every step of the way. With how the storyline is presented, we also see more gray and gloom with each new location before we get to see what they look like with some actual sunlight, leading to bad, elongated first impressions of how the game should look at its best. The overarching storyline of exploring and investigating feels more like a tour than anything else, with no real stakes due to the hunter being so powerful that they can handle any task thrown at them. Through this, the decision to watch Nata's growth gets invalidated since, while he does grow, we often don't get to see why, considering it is the hunter that makes all of the decisions for Nata in the game. High-rank plots, on the other hand, are more short and sweet. They still suffer from prolonged walking segments from time to time, but these are definitely more spread out than you are used to from a low rank. And with these title updates bringing stronger monsters, they try to make the stakes feel at least a little more dire. Well, with Gogmazios anyway. The rest of them are all pretty tame. You know where they'd probably be better off developing deep and engaging stories? Probably the game called Monster Hunter Stories, which has leaps and bounds better plot points than any mainline game could ever dream of. I just don't understand this shift in focus. Is it meant to appeal to a wider audience? Do they value the storyline more now than they did in the past? What is it exactly that made them decide to do this? Whatever it isn't working out at the moment, at least not for me. I want my Monster Hunter game to let me hunt. And I mean hunt, not just fight. I want to find and encounter new monsters on my own accord throughout the game's progression. That's a big part of where the charm and whimsy lie. Going through the game at your own speed, on your own path, and then unlocking new content once you've done enough of something at a lower rank. Key quests were so good for this. They allowed you to fight specific monsters to unlock new content, but you could do it in any order you wanted to and at any point. I miss that a lot, and I think the only reason we see this new assignment-based system is because they needed to change how the system works due to the greater focus on storyline in World and Wilds. And frankly, I think that blows. Let's talk a bit more about progression specifically and what that looks like within Wilds. Like I mentioned, previous games in the series would offer you an assortment of unique quests per star rank. Some of the quests in this pool would be key quests. Completing all key quests, or some depending on the game, would unlock an urgent quest. Completing the urgent would raise your star rank and eventually bring you into high rank or G rank depending on what you were working on. World shifted this concept before Rise brought an example of the original back. Wilds would then go on to use what World has established. This is due to how the storyline is more heavily tied to the player experience now. All low rank assignments are tied to story progression. You will talk to some individuals at base camp, maybe check out a village, and then you will walk through the field and run into new monsters over and over again. It's almost always exactly the same process while trying to make the monster introduction the more unique aspect. Make no mistake though, you are repeating the same sequence of events over and over again, while getting exposition dumped on you in unskippable walking segments. This makes the game feel like an excruciating slog due to all the downtime. I believe it was an hour into the experience before I was allowed to freely hunt. Not that free hunting is even worthwhile in low rank. The notion that it would take so long to give me full control of what I want to do in the game is ridiculous when compared to other entries that require very little in the form of tutorials and guidance. Sometimes they'll have them, but even then they are few and far between, and short at that. Instead, we now have tutorial segments, story beats, cutscenes, walking segments, some sort of eating segment, learning about the village segments, and finally, monster introductions. If we're lucky, we'll get to hunt the monster too, but who knows. In an attempt to make low rank feel more varied, I guess, Wilds introduced a couple new mechanics, namely the packs and alphas. However, all we get is a single alpha Doshaguma that is part of the storyline. Packs of Doshaguma, Hirobami, and I believe Yi and Kutku exist as well, but you will rarely if ever interact with them due to selecting quests from your handler. I already complained about this, but I cannot stress enough how much they made it seem like this was going to be a big deal in trailers. You would think every monster had a potential to be in a pack and for those packs to have alphas. Maybe monsters would even have a mixture of pack types, who knows. Looks very cinematic and cool, too bad it's completely dropped after the first time you see it. Well, alphas anyway. They at least try to sprinkle packs in here and there, albeit very rarely. During low rank, most of the excursions are focused on investigating and exploring new lands, usually while the land is in the fallow state. By continuing to hunt, explore, and meet the locals, you'll eventually end up against the area's apex monster, and this will repeat like 4 times, and then again in high rank. Hunts into Uthduna, Raidao, New Udra, and Jin Dahad, although you only repelled Jin the first time. Usually progression through these areas will lead to a season of plenty, where the world comes to be more alive and vibrant. There was a lot of focus on this as well in the trailers and previews for the game, mostly due to how drastically certain elements of the land can change. Windward Plains and the Fallow is night and day to the plenty, and while they do start to change more regularly over time later on, it's usually fairly static for the storyline at first. Again, the Fallow is so dreary, and I understand why. It's part of the storyline, to show you the land at its lowest before it resurrects into bountiful resources for all life. However, you get introduced to each area during the Fallow, and for so long, you already have an opinion on what the game looks like before it shows you this was all kind of an illusion. See, our game actually looks good, guys. That's great, man, but I just spent an hour or two in hell to get here, and now I have to do that over and over and over again. You spend hours in the most dreary locations you can imagine, and so the pacing of that into a more colorful, sunny experience, showing the potential of the engine, only to go right into the next drab zone, feels too little and too late. Monster Hunter wasn't about the graphics in the past. I wish they would go back to that, but with such a big focus on making these games feel huge and beautiful, there must be a more critical eye placed upon it, because that's where a lot of development resources are going now instead of into the mechanics. Rarely, if ever, did I see big environmental changes while I was out in the field. It does happen, but so little that I think I only noticed maybe one example of differing weather during my full playthrough of the game for this video, and any other time was from me changing things manually using the rest mechanic. Low rank is incredibly linear and slow paced. You'll fight the same monster in the same order when or if you decide to make a new character. This all leads into your battle with Guardian Arkveld and then Zoshia following that. Once we reach high rank, things are a lot better. No longer are you fully tied down to what the storyline wants from you. Instead, now you will see some monsters you haven't even hunted before on the world map. Sure, it's another example of the game completely gutting the tracking element, but at least it lets you know there's some new content for you to engage with. So there's already new things for you to run into and try out in order to raise your hunter rank. Then, as you achieve rank milestones, other hunts and plot threads will become unlocked, such as Gormagala or monsters within the title updates. Even new mechanical features like upgrades to the melding system develop as you achieve higher ranks up to 100. You can go higher than that, of course, up to 999, but it's 100 where everything seems to be fully unlocked for the player. This also introduces bonus rewards with investigations. Certain monsters on the map, such as tempered ones, will sometimes have additional rewards listed on the quest page. You can turn these into investigations so that you can run them a limited number of times before they disappear, sometimes even guaranteeing a gem in the process. The amount of items and parts they throw at you in this game is truly absurd. Killing Carve a monster, of course. Post-quest rewards, obviously. A part every time you break a wound? Well, that starts to sound like a lot. How about a slew of extra parts and items as a bonus to the hunt as well? Suddenly you are rolling in so many parts you can make anything you want, or you'd think so, but Capcom devised a way to work around this. They want you to feel like you were swimming in parts, but many pieces of equipment now rely on a ticket system on top of the part costs you'd expect. You gain tickets or certificates or whatever for specific monsters, but almost all higher end gear starts to require hunter symbols of some kind, usually from hunting tempered monsters, or higher rank monsters. I think it's mostly tempered. Now, tickets and certificates have been around for some time, but needing to earn hunter symbols for so many pieces of gear make them specifically a huge bottleneck. And eventually you will find yourself looking for the easiest way to farm them, rather than farming the monster you actually need the parts for, since it probably flooded you with those parts already. Monster Hunter is about hunting a specific monster for its specific parts to make a specific set of armor, sometimes accented by another monster or some gatherables, to remove that grind by allowing us to gain way too many parts, with some of them being guaranteed in investigations, and making us focus solely on hunter symbols and the like. You remove a key aspect of what the game was about. I don't know, it just leaves a bad taste in my mouth. I don't appreciate it at all. It should be harder to get the parts I need, and the game should make it so I need less parts to make the gear I want. You know, the old way of doing things. Tempered monsters could offer better weights on item drops in their pool due to the extra challenge. Maybe frenzied monsters could do the same, etc. I should be fighting harder difficulty variants of monsters for better chances at getting the parts I want, and maybe some unique parts as well, but not just to grind hunter symbols as some sort of universal currency in forging. High rank is by far where the game is at its best due to the level of freedom involved. Even being able to change the time and weather manually is so good for completing side quests that require a specific time of day. Speaking of side quests, I would consider it a decent amount that are offered to you. I've seen some people suggest that optional quests in older games outnumbered side quests in Wilds, and that may be true. Still, there's a number of them here, and that number was enough for me. I mentioned earlier that completing all of them got me to about HR 85 when all content was said and done, meaning I only needed 15 more ranks to unlock everything else. In terms of side quest content, there's nothing really there to wow you. It's just hunts that you have already completed before, usually with 2 monsters instead of 1, or a tempered one. Sometimes these quests are for your Palico so he can try out a new tool, and these act as upgrades for the Palico throughout the game. I found upgrades like this to be a bit more involved in the past, sometimes even requiring you to train an assortment of Palicos so they were better for different situations. Now it just feels like we are checking off a list, fighting another easily hunted monster, and seeing our Palico become more effective, meaning everything moving forward will be easier as well. Other quests are similar to what World offered, with various fishing challenges and the hunt for rare endemic life. Fishing ends with you needing to find a Whopper, which introduces you to an entirely new extra fishing mechanic right at the end of the quest line, and it was so unbelievably frustrating to get it to work properly, or even find the Whoppers to begin with. I generally dislike fishing minigames in anything I play though, so take how I feel about it with a grain of salt. Fishing and endemic life searching are not very special, especially since you don't have a player home to display anything in. You have a collection, but that's about it. Also, I don't know why I'm thinking of this now, but in one of my world videos, I mentioned that Iceborne didn't let you see captured monsters in base, but that was wrong on my part. However, Wilds definitely doesn't do this, as the monsters stay captured in the field before eventually running off or disappearing. Everything unique and cool that World seemed to try and add as a means of adding flavor and whimsy to the game was removed in Wilds for some reason. How is it that World, Monster Hunter World, feels like it has more charm than this game of all things? They also introduce a weird set of side quests where you escort Werner and Gemma out into the field and have them use some sort of contraption to help you in the hunt. This unlocks the mechanic for them randomly showing up in the field during normal hunts, but I never saw them show when it mattered and never felt it necessary to utilize it. If anything, it would probably just slow me down the same way it did when I tried it in the side quest itself. They even had a fashion hunter side quest, which had to have been from the influence of the concept within the fandom. By layering your armor with the specific items Gemma asks for, you'll unlock the Carabineer's top from Monster Hunter 4. further showing the Gemma is Little Miss Forge. Even her Yan Kutku plushie is a tell as it belonged to Guildmarm previously. It was a cool concept but a one-off quest, and I think it could have been cool to make it like a weekly bounty or something. Listen, I'm not a fan of the dailies or weeklies in Monster Hunter, but if you're going to introduce something like Fashion Hunter rewards, maybe make it a recurring thing in the game where you already kind of have these things. That way players have an excuse to unlock armor they typically wouldn't in order to have some big payoff. You know, maybe just make it like a quest line. Be kind of cool. Back to milestones, these are mostly used for reaching Gore Magala and Arkfeld in high rank, but they do eventually get used as requirements for Mizu, Steve, and Laggy. However, for whatever reason, some of these have side quest prerequisites as well. I couldn't figure out why I couldn't start the Lagaya Cruise quest line after reaching the proper rank, and it was because I hadn't completed a side quest that I didn't know I was supposed to. I feel like that was probably mentioned online somewhere, but I don't remember seeing it mentioned in the game. Maybe if you check the news bulletin, but I just imagine someone not completing side quests and never realizing Laggy is even in the game because of that. Seems off to tie update monsters to quests like that, namely because they distinguish an update plotline with a blue exclamation mark. If the side quest shows a similar sort of icon to let me know it's a prerequisite, that'd be one thing, but I don't remember seeing anything like that. If I did miss something like that, be sure to let me know and I'll correct it in the description when possible. What about the core gameplay loop that we have come to expect within the game? You know, the real bread and butter of what makes a Monster Hunter game, hunting and exploration. Hunts are broken up into two major categories. You have assignments, which are part of the main storyline and are completed once, and then optional quests, which can be repeated multiple times. And generally, by hunting a monster once, you unlock the ability to run its optional. Pretty basic stuff, but this is the foundation of the modern Monster Hunter experience. I don't completely dislike the linearity of the assignment model, or rather, I understand it due to its necessity. It has to be this way for the story they want to tell and how they want to tell it. I just think the story should be better to make up for it instead of falling so horribly flat. And while I don't hate it, I still prefer the more freeform model with key quests. I'm repeating myself, but assignments always start with the dialogue, maybe a cutscene, and then an unskippable walking segment. From there, you find the monster, hunt it, and then move on to the next one. It's long, draining, and doesn't hook you enough to make it worthwhile. In no reality would I rather be listening to Eric yap about the ecology of the Scarlet Forest than I would be hunting a monster. Tracking, as mentioned, has been removed completely. Unless it's part of the storyline, you will always know where the monster is and the most optimal path to get there, since scout flies are designed to just guide you now. Even if a monster moves, you'll know where it's going to end up thanks to a cross mark on your map. We'll talk about the monsters in more detail a bit later, but the entirety of your hunt is going to be running directly to the monster and beginning to slaughter it as fast as possible. Want to gather on the way? Sure, but you probably barely need to. At some point, I felt as though auras and other gatherables were simply unnecessary within the mid to late game. Call me old-fashioned, but I think gathering should be a core part of the experience throughout the entirety of said experience. Part of what makes Monster Hunter is the gathering of materials and monster parts, and the former sort of gets thrown at the wayside as hunter symbols and the like become more of the focus. Or you just get so many gatherables borderline passively that you'll never need to worry about it. Even worse, most of the items you can gather can be grabbed while mobile on the Seikret by utilizing your slinger. It's completely streamlined to the point it's basically non-existent. I'm so tired of people asking questions like, do you really miss hot and cold drinks? Do you really miss how slow and methodical everything is? Yes. Yeah. Because the game was strictly designed around that for years and years, and then you had a huge generational shift to sell more copies. I think I said this already, but I understand everything changes. Guess what? Monster Hunter 3 Ultimate is not the same as Freedom Unite. Whoa. They have multiple changes between the two of them, and yet somehow I don't have these same types of gripes. That's because there's a limit. There's a limit to what you can take out and change before the game you were playing is no longer the game you played before. If I go from Freedom Unite to 3 Ultimate, those still feel in majority like the same experience. If I go from 3 Ultimate to 4 Ultimate, it's the same thing. If I go from 4 Ultimate to World, suddenly there's so much missing. That's what it is. You can call it streamlining, you can call it quality of life, but what it really is the removal of features. And sure, maybe you think they are tedious, maybe you don't want the limited whetstones and the like, and I understand that. As a game, it's still great, and it still plays and sells super well, but I like the tedium. I like methodical and slow gameplay. That's what Monster Hunter has offered for the majority of its entries, so when you take all of that out, more and more with each release, you get something that doesn't feel like Monster Hunter at all. Even World to Wilds, you can feel this to a surprising extent. So with that in mind, there isn't really any reason to explore unless you want to hunt endemic life or fish. The campsites you'll generally find naturally just by hunting anyway, and you can only have so many set up at a time, so finding them all doesn't even feel encouraged anymore. Hunts no longer promote the exploration or tracking element. Now all it is a straight shot to a Lullab arena, and then you beat its ass so hard that it dies before it even gets to escape to the next area of the map. It's easier than it's ever been to reach a monster. You can travel by Seikret, you can fast travel, and then you just wail on the thing, blowing up its wounds and preventing it from doing anything for the majority of the fight. Don't forget we have focus attacks now that are primarily used with no real downside other than slowing you down to just blow up multiple wounds at once for huge payoffs. So now you can deal high damage and raise your spirit level or relevant charge for other weapons probably. You can also make the monster flinch or just straight up topple them depending. Some weapons have offset attacks now. You have power clashes for weapons that can guard, and most monsters continue to lag behind you in terms of speed. Cooking can be done anywhere, at any time. You can SOS in hunters at any point, and even use powerful support hunters. You can mount monsters and open wounds all over their body before performing a powerful finishing attack that causes them to fall over, as if that mechanic wasn't already broken back in Monster Hunter 4. Everything looks cooler than ever, and nothing has ever mattered less. It's all just so much. There's so much there for the hunter and so little for the monster. You didn't bring any traps? Why not go back and grab some? Better yet, use one of the 20 natural traps marked all over the map that are all conveniently surrounding you. Throw some ivy on a monster or drop one of the several floating boulders on it. Whatever, you don't even need that weapon, just sling anything and everything around you until the monster dies. Having a hard time navigating the more convoluted and dense aspects of the map? Don't worry, we don't need to fix the level design of the map itself. We'll just give you a magical bug GPS to tell you exactly where to go for anything and everything. Why does this game play itself? Speaking of, I do appreciate the more open areas of the map. It was a gripe I had in World, and many of the maps felt difficult to get around. While that is less the case for Wilds, there are still several locations that felt overly difficult to navigate. Probably more of a skill issue on my part at this point though, as I was trying to reach specific sections of the Oil Well Basin in order to do some side content and was having difficulty finding them. The denser, more interconnected areas aren't as few and far between as I think the devs wanted us to believe though. Windward Plains is fairly open for the most part, but every map after it is still a mess in its own way and seems to get a bit worse as they go. The Ice Shard area has a lot of Seikret specific paths to take in order to navigate properly, and it can sometimes be difficult to tell what ledges you can jump off of and which you can't. Regardless, the complexity of the map hardly matters anymore as you can just be guided every which way as long as you set a marker. You can either follow this path manually or just have your Seikret auto-run for you, further removing control from the player. If you are looking for a little more challenge, maybe some of the field surveys are better for you. Not that they'll add much, but this is generally the means of finding specific tempered monsters to fight outside of optionals that include them. The field surveys are all the currently roaming monsters on the field. Some of these monsters may be unique in different ways, such as being tempered, but the main difference is whether or not they offer you those bonus rewards I mentioned earlier. By paying a set amount of research points, you can turn these into repeatable investigations to use and share multiple times. However, there is a set limit on how many times an investigation can be used, whether you succeed or fail. I think that's nice in a way, but an investigation that guarantees you a gem is still a guaranteed gem at the end of the day and fairly powerful. You may be saying, well, you can't always find a guaranteed gem, right? Sure, but if you do find one that's what, 2 or 3 guaranteed? Yeah, it's rare for you, but there's a lot of people playing the same game as you at the same time, and they can all share their investigations via SOS as well. So that means you can just search up the monster you want and see if any bonus listings have what you are looking for. More often than not, they will. There's very little chance left in the game that is built around the concept. It used to be about optimizing your drop rate as much as possible to give yourself the best possible opportunity at getting the items you needed. Now everything is not just handed to you, but thrown at you excessively over and over again. It's like you want it to be so aggressively easy to get to the end of the game so you start grinding the true endgame items over and over again, but why would I want that? The journey used to be about just trying to see as much as you would like to. Monsters didn't guarantee better drops and updates, while essentially outdating equipment from their predecessors. It was more freeform, and there was more reason to just hunt whatever you felt like, rather than focusing on linearly progressing your gear to the next meta build, or just a build that utilizes the updates mechanics, as it will definitely be better every time. In terms of other content, arena quests were added in an update. They're exactly what you expect of them. Clear a hunt in the arena with preset gear as fast as possible to try and get the highest rank. Usually you are rewarded with some sort of currency used in crafting equipment. Event quests return as well, and all arc-tempered monsters can be found here. Some of the quests are fairly unique, like one I did where you hunt a bunch of colored slimes, but others not so much. Most event quests offer a specific type of reward, such as extra HRP or armor spheres. The arc-tempered events used to be temporary, but were made permanent in an update. Thank God, because I would have lost my mind at the notion of them disappearing, especially when they offer new gamma sets with their own stat bonuses and the like. We'll talk more about arc-tempered soon, but can you just imagine them adding like a new tier of monster with actual gear that is worthwhile and making it limited? That's insane. I really would have lost my mind. That is the stupidest decision I've ever heard. Finally, challenge and free quests were introduced. Challenge quests are much like an arena and allow 1 or 2 hunters to attempt fighting a monster with a selection of preset equipment. By completing the hunt, your time and performance will earn you unique pendants, and I believe your overall world ranking will also potentially reward you with one as well. However, plenty of players found ways to cheat their times higher than what was possible. I never personally tried out these challenges because they didn't interest me, especially for the reward provided. How do we not have rainbow pigment in this game yet? I mean, in theory, I think this is a really cool inclusion. It's just too bad it can be so easily ruined for others. So the hunting is flashy, don't get me wrong, but mediocre at best. What about the monsters? Well, I'd be disingenuous if I said they didn't look the best they ever have. Don't get me wrong, there's a certain appeal to the simplicity of the older models and textures, but I can at least appreciate the upgrades and complexity on display within Wilds. Like, I'm not going to sit here and tell you Laggy doesn't look amazing. Gore Magala is awe-inspiring, and even Arkveld, a design I'm not a fan of, has enough going on to be worthwhile eye candy. I'm not going to compare the amount of monsters from one game to another. At this point, I think that doesn't really say much about the game itself. Instead, I want to look at what is actually being offered to us overall. Monsters like Chotacabra, Doshagama, Balahara, and Lalabarina, etc. are some of the starting monsters you will run into and make up the earliest of the new additions. In terms of it, I think they fit into the more grounded designs of the previous older Monster Hunter games. While most monsters have aspects that make them unique, such as their element, their moves, etc., they all feel relatively the same in that they are pushovers and always will be. From low rank to high rank, these monsters are designed to be bullied, and I wouldn't be able to point out anything about them that really makes them stand out, aside from Lalabarina, who is both colorful, more eccentric in its movement, and has an area-wide paralysis effect. Wilds really focuses on showing off their new roster before bringing in the returning ones. However, less utilized monsters like Kongalala finally have an updated next-gen entry to be displayed in, and we see that shortly after reaching the second area of the game. So returning monsters are present, but they seem to carefully select ones that weren't as overused as in the past. There's no Rathalos until late into low rank, and even then it's a special version of the series mascot. It's so nice to have Temnocerons featured more in this entry. Sure, we got Rachna, Kadachi, and Rise, but to have Lalabarina and the return of Nursilla, a frenzied Nursilla, and a digital recreation of Nursilla for the Omega event, we're swimming in spiders. And monsters we haven't seen in a while like Gravios and Nyankutku are finally back once you start high rank. We even have Gypsaros. You know, not one of the most exciting monsters to see return, but one that deserved to be brought back eventually so that they could have their time in the limelight. Plus, they really feel like they fit well within the environment of Wilds, and next to the newer monsters in the roster, feels very cohesive in a way it may not have in a game like Rise. Like I mentioned, you won't be interacting with many optional packs, but through the story you will deal with a pack of Yankutku as well as Hirabami, one of the new monsters in the game that is a floating leviathan. A lot of people seem to complain about Hirabami, but I don't understand why. I assume it has to do with it floating, but melee weapons can still bring it down to the ground with flash bombs. Even if you run out, you can break the tail multiple times for slinger ammunition that help ground it. Hilariously, it's probably one of the more technical fights in the game that actually requires a little bit of thought. Just a little though. Both New Udra and Zhu Wu are potentially the most unique enemies in the game and have some of the more deadly follow-up attacks as well. The long back away and wind up for Zhu Wu's devastating charge attack, where it bares all of its teeth, still gets me, even if it's an incredibly easy fight outside of that. See, the biggest weakness of these guys is that you can sort of get in between some of their tentacles and then just wail away at them. They have some moves to try to prevent this, but I find this usually is the easiest strategy when fighting them and makes it possible to just ignore pretty much anything else about them. Despite that, I'm really happy to have a new design akin to the Nakarkos from Monster Hunter Generations. New Udra is one of the 4 apexes in the game and is meant to stand above the rest in terms of design and mechanics. I'd say it succeeds in a way, considering it is one of the more unique designs out there at the moment. However, compared to the other apexes, such as Rei Dao and Jin Dahad, you'd think it was small time. Rei Dao is such an aggressive fight, and one the game really needed early on. A fast and deadly flying wyvern that has a built-in railgun on its head and a crystal shell it can develop on its body for you to break off. It was such a striking monster that I originally thought it was supposed to be the flagship. I still can't believe we got Arkfeld instead because Rei Dao is way more iconic to me. And don't even get me started on Jin Dahad, that has to be one of the best designs in the entire game. It's like a cross between a typical Leviathan and a Gen Moran. Giant in size and deadly with part break mechanics that keep the fight more interesting than just wailing on the same spot over and over again. Even Duna has something special like that, with a sort of veil you can break periodically to make it easier at hitting weak points. You can tell a lot of love and care went into the apexes specifically, and Rei Dao probably offers the greatest challenge in the game until you finally run into Arkfeld. Arkfeld as a fight is definitely one of the better ones. Fast, deadly, and these long-reaching chains that you can break off of its body. What it lacks in color, which is fine, it makes up for in more mechanical complexity, and it is one of the only monsters that can actually keep up with a solo hunter. With a group of 4 though, not a chance. Late into low rank, you will also start running into guardian monsters, the man-made versions of existing monsters that have been desaturated with glowing white decals all over them like a custom car in Need for Speed Underground. For the most part, they are pushovers like the rest, and some of the guardians in this game don't even have their normal counterpart. There's Guardian and normal Rathalos, but no normal Ebony Odogaron for some reason. They function very similarly to their regular counterparts, however, their wounds can rapidly heal over time, meaning you need to utilize them ASAP if you want to get the most out of the mechanic. Additionally, they can cause Wilk explosions, form Wilk crystals, and blow up those crystals as well. Guardian monsters can be toppled by destroying enough of these wounds, and they seem to lose their power in the process, forcing them to be exhausted as they don't seem to enter the state normally. Eventually, the monsters need to go find a source of Wilk to absorb so that they can be back in fighting shape. If we're being realistic, you're gonna brute force through most of these mechanics because none of them are particularly deadly, and since you can automatically destroy a wound with a focus attack, you'll rarely ever lose out on them through the Guardian's regeneration mechanic. The explosions do add an added element to the fight, but overall they operate so similarly to the originals, I'm not sure why they are here outside of storyline requirements. After the defeat of Zoshia, the player will start running into tempered monsters, which are denoted with a purple outline around their icon. Originally in World, tempered monsters were a product of consumed bioenergy, the answer to everything in that game. Now they are veteran monsters that have survived constant struggle, seen with scars around their body. Kinda like deviants in a way. I definitely like this reasoning more. Tempered monsters, while stronger and more resistant than their normal counterparts, even seem to ascend through different star rankings from time to time. You could fight a specific star rank of tempered monster, and then that same monster but at a higher rank made even stronger. The areas where there are scars can be wounded, and these lead to a special blue wound I mentioned earlier, where destroying them guarantees a topple. When the new talisman melding was added in an update, you could get the stones for this by fighting 9-star tempered monsters after HR 100. Other than being more difficult in that they hit harder and may be more difficult to wound, tempered monsters don't offer much to distinguish themselves from their normal counterparts. Maybe better rewards or a better chance of having field survey bonuses, but that's usually it. When searching for a specific monster using the SOS system, I often check tempered first as they seem more prone to having big bonuses and guaranteed gems. Additionally, some of these monsters may get tuned through higher tiers to offer slightly adjusted moves or mechanics, although I rarely notice this specific difference if they are present. However, the Arc-tempered state, saved for Arkfeld and the 4 Apex monsters, acts as a higher state of being than tempered, with even higher bonuses, and does seem to offer some new moves to mix things up. or at least uses stronger moves more regularly. These continue to further offer rewards, and most recently they had 10-star versions added at HR 100 that let you earn even better talismans. You can only fight Rei Dao and Uthduna at HR 50, and I don't think you'll notice much of a difference with them in comparison to normal tempered versions outside of the damage bonuses. The other Apexes and Arkveld show up at HR 100, who also have the 10-star versions now. Arc-tempered monsters are way more worthwhile to hunt in my opinion. While they show up in event quests instead of investigations, meaning no bonuses, they offer their own unique gamma sets past the alpha and beta versions. We haven't gone into detail about equipment yet, but these generally offer an important set bonus that can be split between multiple different arc-tempered monsters rather than just a single one. Finally, frenzy monsters mark their return, and I have nothing to really say about them other than that they are pushovers and not worth your time. Meant to be more aggressive and having less HP as an offset, these monsters crumble so easily that there's a new quest to hunt like 5 in a row and it takes no time at all. Frenzy monsters can infect the player as well. If you let the gauge fill, it will apply a debuff where you take more damage while also preventing healing somewhat. However, by attacking enough, you can overcome the virus and gain an affinity boost. It's meant to be accentuated by Gore Magala equipment, as the set bonus empowers the affinity boost and infects you automatically, leading to a little more risk versus reward gameplay. Zoshia was something. I don't know if it was just because I hadn't done the fight in some time, but it reminded me a lot of Xeno'jiiva. Just a big, slow monster in an arena with plenty to throw at it. The best part about the fight was the presentation, I suppose, watching the crystallization slowly break off to show the man-made equal dragon weapon-ass look underneath. But nothing else about the fight is really that engaging. I guess aside from that one mechanic they need to add to every major fight that I sort of despise. I don't know why they keep doing this, but modern MH loves adding a one-shot AoE ability that you gotta dodge by hiding behind some rock or something. Jin Dahad has this, Safi Jiva had this, and it's been rearing its ugly head all over in World and Wilds. To be fair, it's sort of the opposite for Zoshia, as you need to break a crystal formation to create a safe zone rather than hiding behind it, but it's the same basic concept in theory. They just keep doing this for some reason over and over again. It's like they no longer know how to make large-scale monsters interesting. Maybe Zora Magdaros scared them or something, because I think people found that fight very bland and repetitive. They even do it for Omega and Gogmazios, although I think Omega is at least more acceptable for reasons I'll touch on shortly. Just do something else, man. I used to climb all over giant monsters to break weak points and then have these cool head-to-heads against them where I got to hit them with a Dragonator and Proof of a Hero would play and I'd still climb all over them. The sense of scale and urgency was so cool all the time, and now it's always the same thing. Oh, we got a giant dragon thing. Better hide behind some rocks while the cool explosion effect goes off because we have no sense of imagination or creativity whatsoever anymore. Cool. What a snooze fest. Title updates brought with it multiple returning monsters and one new one. Mizutsune, Lagaya Cruz, and Steve all saw their return in Monster Hunter Wilds, and this was a long time coming for Laggy in particular. I don't know what it is about Mizutsune, but they seem to love putting it in a lot lately. Feels like Zenogre all over again, not that I'm complaining. While Mizu and Steve both showed up in Rise or Sunbreak during 5th gen, none of the three I just listed have had what I would call the world treatment, with all the next-gen graphical fixings. Laggy showed up in a tech demo for World, of course, and we've been begging for him to show up ever since. Each monster looks fantastic in Wilds. The textures and details really bring them to life, especially in terms of color with Mizu and Laggy, and complexity with Seregios, as his individual blade scales move around. Mizutsune was the first additional monster to appear in Title Update 1, alongside the ability to hunt Zoshia again. If you have hunted Mizu before, it's probably what you would expect overall. However, they did look to offer a bit of an extra challenge by sneaking Soul Seer in there. Near the end of the hunt, Mizu seems to enrage into its deviant Soul Seer form from Monster Hunter Generations Ultimate, leading to more aggression, changes to its moveset, and added fire element. This took me off guard the first time around and was a welcome inclusion, as it really felt like it was raising the stakes in the middle of the hunt. It was a great way to reintroduce a monster while giving it a little something extra, which they seem to try to do with Laggy as well. Laggy really was a long time coming, and there was a lot of theories surrounding how they could make the hunt more enjoyable due to Laggy being a predominantly underwater hunt. While you can hunt it on the surface, especially against its ivory subspecies, a big part of what makes the hunt special is the underwater elements present in Monster Hunter Tri and 3U. Well, in the Title Update 2 trailer, we got our answer on how Capcom was planning on handling it, with scenes of laggy underwater and the hunter actively being controlled down there as well. People began to wonder if they were really introducing underwater combat again, and solely for a single monster. Unfortunately, no, that's not the case. I mean, it probably was never going to be. It was like more like a fool's dream, or whatever that phrase is. Acting more as a callback to Generation 3, Legaia Cruz will spend part of the hunt heading underwater, allowing you to follow him. However, while you can swim here, what you're allowed to do is limited to the slinger, shooting pods at Laggy, latching onto it for a scripted attack, or breaking parts of the environment to have them land on him for big damage. It's simplistic and limited, but the fact that we got anything like this at all and for it to look so good was well beyond what I thought would be possible or within the range of what they were willing to do. It really did feel amazing to be underwater with a Legaia Cruise again after such a long time, and brought a lot of memories back for me personally, considering 3 Ultimate is my favorite entry in the series. However, the excitement wears off when you have to repeat the mechanic every single hunt. There are a few caveats, but Legaia Cruise will always make you jump through these mechanical hoops every single time. And with little variety in what you can do down there and where it decides to go underwater, only ever diving at the same place, it gets old very quickly. It got so old that I even got tired of attempting hunts for the parts I needed, which is a real monkey's paw feeling to me. They added my favorite monster and then also added a segment that made me not want to hunt it repeatedly. Kind of amazing how they did that. Eventually, I just ran an event quest where you hunt a Legaia Cruz and a Rathalos in the arena, meaning Laggy has nowhere to go, and I found this way more enjoyable. It was for armor spheres, so I don't think you got as many laggy parts, but it was still better than doing the water segment over and over again. You can't even use your weapons underwater, man. Like, I get why. I understand the work that would need to go into that, but it just ended up feeling like a tease that grew old fast because there was no variety. It's such a shame. I'm still grateful to have him back and to be able to build his set in all of its glory. I just think his underwater segment should have been a chance-based or optional aspect to the hunt, and it would have been borderline perfect. As a surprise, Sergio was also added in Title Update 2 alongside Laggy. I don't have much to say about Sergio specifically, other than I think the presentation and detail of the model are insane and stellar. Really just one of the best looking monsters in the game with one of the best looking sets. They cooked so hard with Gen 4 designs, man. What a time to be alive. Anyway, there's 2 more monsters I want to talk about in a bit more detail that also show up through title updates. Specifically, I want to look at the Final Fantasy XIV collab fight with Omega and the final hunt where you fight Gogmazios. Typically, I'm not a fan of collab hunts. I found the Witcher collab in World against Celestian to be more annoying than engaging, and I also wasn't a fan of Behemoth or how they tried to incorporate MMO mechanics into it. That being said, so much was added to the Omega collab that I found myself being more wowed than anything else. And with the use of support hunters, I didn't have to rely on players that were carding 3 times in a row to every Omega I tried. That happened like twice to me, man. I'm like scarred. I'm scarred forever. As a collab, there's multiple plot points to help you along the path and plenty to see that reminds you of 14. I am a regular subscriber to Final Fantasy XIV, although I don't play as much nowadays. Back then they offered a Rathalos mount. Now I think you get a Seikret mount for defeating Arkveld. Talk about a downgrade. Rather than just providing a new monster for you to hunt, the collab offered a reworked Nursilla as well, with multiple new moves to keep you on your toes. The fight against Omega itself still has the enmity mechanic, where you can force it to target certain players, sort of like a tank in an MMO. This makes it easier for the other players to focus on creating and destroying wounds on Omega's legs, which is necessary to get it out of its enraged state. As a gimmick, they even offered telegraphed AoE attacks that you can dodge. You can sort of tell where you need to stand for other non-telegraphed moves based on the name that gets announced as it's readying it. A real Final Fantasy XIV raiding experience if there ever was one. I hated fighting Omega in 14, man. It was awful. I'm not good at reading in the moment. I already have enough time remembering to reapply my dots. I'm really bad at it. I don't know. Omega was potentially the only fight in the game that took me multiple tries to fully understand, probably because I forgot to use the Pictomancer item to cycle through Pictomancer job moves periodically throughout the fight. These free attacks that are on cooldown could be used sequentially to deal heavy damage to the enemy, which was especially good for wounding the legs and breaking them. Without these, the fight can take way longer than you'd like, especially with support hunters. But it's not just that. The fact of the matter is that Omega is sort of like what you would expect of monsters in the game if they kept up with hunters. It's not just agile, but it can throw so much at you that you have to be very present during the majority of the hunt in order to make sure you don't get rocked by one of the million projectiles coming your way, or its side AoEs that can throw out. I really appreciate it for this. It felt like the most exciting hunt in the game for me out of pretty much any of them, including laggy. It even has its own instant kill mechanic in the form of a DPS check. I'm a little more forgiving of a DPS check in Monster Hunter when it's a collaboration with a game notorious for them, like a basic feature, but I don't really like them in the game regardless. Still, it's more about defeating a separate Nursilla that spawns, and you can really plan ahead for it by using the environmental objects and having the final level of the Pictomancer attack ready to go, since it's a high damage laser. It was when I was finally able to pass the DPS check by, preparing and learning that I was able to finish the hunt. I usually die to the instant kill mechanic before that happened and then have to enter the final phase with one less cart. To make matters worse, you are actively punished for failing this as Omega's hit zone seems to change and your attacks become less effective in many areas. If you took out the team wipe and just made it punish you that way through upgrades, I think it would have been perfect, and I think that's a better, more varied way of doing something like that for other monsters as well. Overall, the Omega fight felt fast-paced and challenging, and the gimmick mechanics felt less like gimmicks and more like I had to run for my life regularly. If anything managed to emulate the feeling of dread of a monster having its sights on you in an older Monster Hunter game, it was this hunt specifically with a monster not from a Monster Hunter game. Plus you get to hear one of the best themes in Final Fantasy XIV as well. Finally, we have Gogmazios, another one of my favorite monsters from Gen 4. You can really tell that Wilds is a love letter to Monster Hunter 4 Ultimate specifically with Gore Magala, Gogmazios, Seregios, Fabius, Nadia, Gemma, and so many references. Gog acts as the culmination of all that and wants to be the most grand encounter in Wilds yet. You can tell they are trying to make it as much of a spectacle as Fatalis in World, but I think anything would have a hard time living up to that. Still, the fight itself is what I consider a great set-piece fight. It's not difficult or engaging necessarily, but more there to wow you with the spectacle. It's also one of those fights where they highly recommend specific weapon elements, those being fire and dragon. I wasn't a big fan of that in World with Alatreon, and I don't really like it here. In my mind, elements are a means of giving yourself an edge based on monster knowledge, but are not necessarily make or break. Alatreon changed that, but GOG seems like it would be more lenient. I did the fight with the proper elements though, so I'm not completely sure. But the grand majority of this feels almost scripted even if it isn't. Additionally, it feels like it's less about hunting the Gogmazios yourself and more about using everything around you. That might seem odd considering the original fight in MH4U, so let's compare the two. Generally speaking, the new fight is broken up into cinematic phases. You fight Gogmazios head to head using your weapon, and periodically Fabius will block an incoming attack for no reason. Then you climb up a level and set up a giant railgun that was on Gogmazios' back by charging it using 3 little plugs you gotta carry over, dealing insanely massive damage in the process. Finally, you fight Gogmazios with everyone at the top of the map in what is not really a typical hunt. You will mostly just be riding your Seikret and grabbing the special slinger ammo that shoot a charged laser beam for a large chunk of damage over and over again until Fabius tells you to get behind him, acting as the rock that blocks all damage, while Gogmazios blows up the map. You then rinse and repeat until the fight is over. It looks cool, but there's not a lot of freedom there, and I imagine repeat hunts are just repeating the specific steps over and over, much like how Laggy has to repeat the underwater segment. In the original game, you have a single giant arena to play with Gogmazios in. Within it, tools are made readily available to you at the start, and the Dragonator can periodically be used once it charges. Things like cannonballs and the like can be used as long as you don't run out, and you need to generally set all of this up on your own. No forced cinematic moments giving you the perfect shot to hit him, but instead various opportunities as the hunt flows freely and naturally. It feels way more satisfying to land a Dragonator knowing how easy it could be to miss, and how much time you'll lose waiting for the next one. It feels great figuring out how to use your limited resources as best you can, and then planning out ballista binders as they become available. Even the Dragonator on its back that falls off still needs to be utilized properly, otherwise it'll miss or potentially disappear for not being used at all. If Gogmazios in Wilds is a linear movie to watch rather than play, Gogmazios in MH4U was a sandbox and the dragon is knocking all of the sand castles down. You choose how the story plays out based on decision making and your skill level, and there's no real guidance here. You need to figure it out, either by yourself or with your friends and allies. And once you do figure it out and clear Gog for the first time, it's one of the greatest feelings in Monster Hunter history. And when I beat Gogmazios in Wilds, I felt nothing even close to that. I thought it was a pretty fun fight, cool to look at, but hollow and indicative of what is wrong with the design philosophy of the modern series. These giant hunts used to be so liberating. Fighting Gogmazios, climbing on Jen Moran or Lao Shanlung, running into Fatalis, seeing Alatreon for the first time. These fights were scary and with little explanation or guidance. You needed to figure out what the hell you had available to you and slowly learn how to make it work in your favor. I don't think many of these were designed to be completed the first time. I think you're supposed to learn and try again, prepare better the next time, use those items around you more effectively. Even Fatalis, while fairly cinematic, seemed to strike a good balance in world. But here it just felt like our hand was being held along the way until Gogmazios was finally defeated, and I think that's unfortunate and sad, and I really hope whatever their big reveal at the end of the update cycle for Wilds expansion tries to live up to what we had in the past. Monsters in Wilds are often a disappointment. They look cool, but then provide little more than an existence as punching bag pinatas full of parts. The best part of bringing Seregios over was that he's so unconventional in his moveset. It feels like a much more difficult fight because of that. Mizu felt scary because it had an entire install that you never expected. Laggy was cool because we hadn't seen him in a while, but then they ruined it partially with the underwater segment. Gogmazios should have been a liberating experience, and ended up being one of the more linear overall. It's sad that they seem to care more about cinema than they do about player freedom, that they care more about power fantasy than they do about challenge and grit, about pushing the player through difficult scenarios, not just making the monster hit harder. Gogmazios in MH4U wasn't scary because it hit harder, it was scary because it was a moving mountain for you to overcome, a mystery to solve, a real challenge. You couldn't just fly around him, you had to make do, and you needed to optimize how to do that. You needed to optimize in a lot of older fights because they asked that of you, because you were slow and weak, and they were big, fast, and strong. Nothing we have now lives up to the Gogmazios we had in Monster Hunter 4 Ultimate, especially not Gogmazios in Wilds. There's one final aspect of the game I feel we should go over before ending things, and that's the equipment as a whole. We focused on the world and mechanics surrounding hunting, but never talked about the equipment in depth. We talked a lot about the mechanics of weapons, focusing solely on the longsword, as I tend to do. But what about equipment as a whole, from weapons to armor to Ardian? Weapons have been made more diversified in comparison to World, which was notorious for its slap-on designs, using iron or bone as a base and adding an accent to the weapon depending on the monster it was made from. It wasn't every weapon, but it was most of them, and it was easily some players' least favorite aspect of the game. Believe it or not, the unique look of equipment is a big selling point for a game centered so heavily around it. Not only do designs for weapons look more unique and varied, weapons also introduce weapon skills to the mix. Previously, only armor would have skills attached to it that you could stack more of to level up the effect or vary the amount of skills instead. Wilds look to make this more purposeful by making certain skills weapon specific and having weapons come with an assortment of these skills instead of placing them only on armor. This way you can build a set around both the weapon and armor and maybe change up your skills by swapping between two similar weapons on the field. With this change, decorations have been placed in two categories as well. Weapons and armor have slots that can hold decorations. Smaller decorations fit in smaller slots and any larger slots above that. Higher decorations are larger and require larger slots to facilitate this. The difference is that some decorations have been shifted into a new weapons category, while others remain specifically for armor. You now have to focus more on what a weapon offers in terms of skills, rather than solely on its damage, affinity, and elemental output. While those are still major focuses, sometimes a slightly weaker weapon may have more slots or built-in skills that make your build more effective or comfy. With weapons and armor split off in this way, you can now make the most out of whatever weapons you want and make the most out of whatever armor, and then combine those two categories as you see fit, making weapon selection feel more varied and purposeful in theory. In reality, you'll probably just roll for a strong Ardian weapon. Similar to World, you can either make and upgrade weapons step by step, or you can sometimes skip to various parts of the tree that the game allows you to. For this reason, I usually hold on to crafting every longsword until I've nearly completed all the content available so I can more easily get everything to the final tier. I really enjoy how unique weapons feel now, and overall I think monster weapons are in a good place, at least in theory. Ardian weapons can generally blow some of these out of the water, if not always. With Title Update 2, layered weapons were also added. Again, a feature that should have been in the base game, and has no reason to not have been considering that layered armor was in from the get-go. You're telling me they couldn't figure out layered weapons in time for release? Either that's a lie, or they planned on adding it later to entice you coming back, or it's true and they were forced to rush the game out. Either way, it's not good. Armor unlocks layering at high rank, and before that you'll have one version of each set. However, players can now craft any gendered version of gear they want, as it is accessible to both model types. Unisex armor was something I had been advocating for some time, and people always told me it would never happen because it couldn't happen. Too much work for the game that makes 1 million armor sets and has 14 weapon types apparently. Lo and behold, I guess it wasn't that bad. I think the newest complaint surrounding this is that alpha and beta sets don't look different because of this, but guess what, gang? They looked the same between the two with slight color modifications and high rank world as well. Maybe the master rank will be different. Regardless, armors are probably the best thing about the game in terms of eye candy. Textures look surprisingly good when compared to landscapes and everything else, and have a lot of depth. They must have gotten even better in an update because I swear they didn't look this good before. For whatever reason, the game doesn't want you to be able to upgrade armor right away, which unfortunately feeds into the idea that the entirety of low rank is some sort of hand-holder tutorial for you to get through over hours before reaching the real game. I can't keep harping on the current armor skill system since I have over multiple games at this point. It is what it is, and it didn't feel different enough to be worth going in depth about. You stack multiple skills and multiple levels of the same skill over and over, trying to maximize damage and comfort with no downsides whatsoever. It's power fantasy at its peak, and requires little thought unless you truly care about min-maxing and finding the meta. I find the system simplistic, overly powerful, and therefore boring, and I say the same thing every time since World. On top of potential set bonuses, there are now group skills as well, where you may earn a skill for wearing enough armor pierces that fit a theme. Helps offer you something without limiting you to one monster's set, as mixing and matching has always been one of the best parts of set building. Arc-tempered gear can give you Lord Soul as an example, and boost your attack while lowering defense. It provides one use of Moxie, where you survive a lethal hit if you are above a certain HP threshold, and then boosts defense and resistances as well. So armor feels as freeform as ever, and you can pretty much do whatever you want. There is very little reason to feel compelled to maximize anything, especially since I value comfort above all. I'd rather have earplugs for if I messed up a counter than to have to deal with the roar. I want my evades extended, and more. The easier it is for me to keep hitting the enemy, the more DPS I am personally going to do. The defensive value of armor can once again be raised with armor spheres, and once again the armor spheres are assigned point values instead of being tiered upgrades that require certain types and amounts of armor spheres alongside monster parts. My main issue with it is how expensive it seems to get. Like, absurdly so. I don't think I ever ran out of Zenny until I started to make some endgame sets, but that just means I needed to sell some parts and run some event quests. Is that necessarily a bad thing? Probably not, but I didn't enjoy it as much. Once you hit HR 100, you can start to transcend your armor. Then you just use even more armor spheres to further boost the piece's defense. I assume this was an addition they felt necessary to help with HR 100 arc-tempered fights as well as Gogmazios. Palico equipment also returns but feels more for aesthetic than use. Do you ever really notice a difference considering it's always around? I'm sure there is one, it's just inconsequential to me. I go for the highest defense and then slap on a layered set. Talismans had a weird time in this one. I mentioned this earlier, but World had it so you crafted talismans and were awarded random decorations with the ability to meld some specific and random ones. The other way the game can do it, and has done it in the past, is to make decorations craftable and talismans random. For whatever reason, talisman melding was added as well, and you can earn them through, I believe, 9-star quests and up. What a wonderful change. I really prefer talismans like this and decorations craftable because you need so many decorations to fit into a set. Feels better to craft all of those and know you can get them, while treating talismans more like a bonus. A god talisman is cool, but any talisman I can reasonably work with is fine. This feels like they realized one was better than the other and started to shift halfway. Now if they just made the rest of decorations meldable, it'd be perfect. So is there a major issue with equipment in this game that we need to discuss? Well, even taking away the idea of hunter symbols and the grind for those, yes, there is a major problem that I think cheapens the value of many weapons simply by existing. I'm of course talking about Ardean weapons. If you had to ask me what the worst mechanic in MH history was, it was probably the wounding system with clutch claws, followed by wounding in wilds with focus attacks. If you asked me what the next worst thing in this series was, it would be Ardean weapons. Generic weapons with randomized stats is not new to the Monster Hunter legacy. Relic weapons back then were gained from a specific mechanic known as the Everwood and would have randomized stats, sort of pushing you away from using the weapons you would traditionally grind for through deliberate monster hunts. It's a mechanic that seems to feed off the destruction of the other core weapon forging the series is known for. Ardean weapons are even worse in my opinion, as they really require no specifications other than mindless grinding of almost any tempered monster, especially if you run investigations that offer tons upon tons of relics that can be random assortments of parts with various stats. Basically, you hunt for a ton of relics regardless of what you are fighting, then they reveal themselves similar to decorations and talismans so you can see what parts you got. There's different rarity levels, but I'll just be focusing on the highest one for explanation's sake. These parts or shards come in 4 categories, those being blades, discs, tubes, and devices. Depending on what weapon you're trying to make, you need to have a specific combination of these 4, like longsword takes 1 blade and 2 tubes as an example. These parts can have elemental statuses, and if 2 of the parts have an elemental match, they will gain the element on the weapon, with a bonus to the amount if the element is the same on everything. So you are rolling for specific elements on specific parts. If you want a dragon longsword, you will want 1 dragon blade and 2 dragon tubes, as this will give you the most dragon element possible. Additionally, these parts will either have an attack or affinity focus. These stack onto the base stats of the weapon. Affinity goes up 5% per part, and attack goes up varying amounts as well. Generally, I found it better to just stack attack damage onto a longsword, allowing me to make effective fire and dragon Ardean weapons for when I fought Gogmazios. You get boatloads of these relics as you fight tempered monsters, especially with investigations. Just by grinding for armor sets, you can earn countless amounts and even meld them. Plus, the game gives you tons of bonus tickets for melding, so you really will have no issue finding the proper combinations you are looking for. You'll almost always have everything you need for any weapon element. The nice thing about this mechanic is that it can cover your bases. Longsword doesn't have a blast option, but you can still make your own if you want to. The bad thing about this is how it invalidates almost the entirety of weapon forging for some class types. Correct me if I'm wrong, but there doesn't seem to be any reason to run the top fire longsword that you can make from monster parts over an attack maxed Ardean equivalent. Sure, the monster weapon will have some built-in skills, but the Ardean weapon is going to have 3 free level 3 slots at max rarity. You can slot whatever you want to match and then some. Again, I don't believe this is true for every weapon class, but some have no reason to hunt monsters further after creating the best relic weapons. On top of this, you can reinforce these Ardean weapons once they are done. Using special festival ores from Azu's, which you can get more of with monster parts by the way, you can reinforce the weapon up to 5 times. Each time gives the weapon a random augment, including attack, affinity, element, sharpness, and capacity for bowguns. What these augments will be is actually already decided. If you crafted the weapon and reinforced it, then quit without saving and crafted it again, it would be the exact same result, assuming you crafted the same weapon class and rarity. It's an advancing seed randomization, therefore the only way to re-roll in this game, if you care about that, is to make another weapon of the class and rarity, and then try again using the parts you actually want for the next one. You keep doing this over and over until you get what you want, again, if you care about that. I don't necessarily care how they do the randomization. What I care about is the augments themselves and how strong they can make these weapons overall in comparison to the core weapons that, in my opinion, should always trump over something like this. Monster Hunter is about hunting monsters for their parts and turning those parts into weapons. The only reason we have this new Ardean mechanic is because they want you to keep rolling and gambling for new stuff if you've already made everything there is to make for your weapon class. Oh, you want the best fire longsword? Get gambling. Over and over and over. Keep coming back and playing the game. Keep rolling those dice. This weapon is going to be so much better than the ones you've earned through playing the game, as it is usually intended to be played. You just gotta get even more lucky than usual. I play these games in an attempt to get the parts, and I do my best to increase the chance of what I want dropping. That's always been the point. Now you're telling me all of that has been thrown out the window for a glorified slot machine. Why would anyone want that? You turned hunting monsters for parts into relic farming to extend the game life arbitrarily. It gets even worse. Monster weapons are so outdated that Gogmazios doesn't even have its own unique weapons to craft anymore. Instead, you get tarred devices that can ascend an Ardean weapon into a Gogma one. By using 3 of the same focus, you'll get a Gogma Ardea weapon with some buffs and debuffs associated with the type of focus used. What's more important is that it will re-roll your reinforcements and potentially give you higher tiered versions of those reinforcements as well. Attack boost 1 could be 2 to 3 now, or even EX, which is the best. I think a raw boosted LS is currently the best overall option right now, but for any element, the Gogma weapon is always on top. On top of these rolls, you'll also get 2 random active skills. These will always be a random set bonus and a random group bonus. One of the best you can get is a Gore Magala set and the Arc-Tempered group skill, although this seems to change here and there. These count as 1 point towards the set/group bonus, meaning you have a lot more leeway now for optimizing your armor sets. By using additional focuses, you can choose to re-roll all of your reinforcements or re-roll your active skills, so that's all the endgame progression has become for Longsword at the very least. Even if you don't care about meta, you'll probably want to roll for at least a semi-decent Gogma Ardean because of how powerful they are. You literally don't need anything else. You just hunt tempered monsters for relics and hunt Gogmazios for tarred devices, over and over and over and over and over and over again. Then you can go fight the 10-star Arc-Tempered Arcveld, I guess. Yippee. The entirety of Monster Hunter Wilds culminates into gambling on robot weapons that look like ass until they get shifted by Gogmazios. Those actually do look sick as hell. They always looked sick as hell, they still do. Why would we turn the entirety of the game up to the final update into the idea that you need to hunt a single monster to make the best of almost every weapon class, and then you get to fight some slightly more difficult Arc-Tempered variations? Is that what the series is now? Just a means to an end? We plateau and then it's just the same thing over and over again? Gogmazios isn't even a challenge, it's an interactive cutscene that you watch over and over again until you get all the random gambling currency you need to run the slot gauntlet again, and I think that blows, man. I think it's indicative of what Monster Hunter has become, and I think it blows. Looking at it now, this really did turn out more negative than I thought it would. On its own, without previous Monster Hunter games to compare it to, Wilds is a great experience. It's action-packed, exciting, and with all the updates, it feels like there is a ton to do. If you ever wanted to feel powerful and beat the tar out of some giant dragons, this is the game to do that in, with a mediocre story slapped on. Earlier I asked, what makes a Monster Hunter game a good Monster Hunter game? The answer to that is varied, but what I think is most important is grounded, purposeful mechanics that require commitment and preparation. Maybe not for every hunt, but important excursions should see me deciding on what the best armor for a situation is, if I am truly attached to a specific set, and maybe what weapons or items I should bring along. I should have limited space and resources, and the inability to refresh said resources when I run out, outside of some limited occasional bonuses here and there. I should have to make do with what I have, and what I have should be based on experience, on what I know I will need. I should need to grind for those materials and items, and I should have minimal help in doing so. Those items should stay relevant throughout the experience. If I fight a monster, it should feel intimidating. It should feel like I need to use every limited mechanic in my arsenal to make it through this hunt alive. Mechanics in themselves should be more limited and purposeful. Tools within the environment should be effective, but rare, instead of watered down and everywhere. I shouldn't have a new move that lets me destroy monsters with precision and keep them pinned down every time I break one of their wounds. I shouldn't be rewarded for rushing in blindly without a care in the world. That's one of the biggest issues with these newer games, power and abundance. The game is designed to make you feel powerful and for you to want to be continually pushing through those barriers, getting stronger and stronger to a point where there isn't a single monster that can keep up. They want you to stack countless skills, to have countless items at your disposal, and to use countless environmental traps over and over again. They want you to come back to the game over and over, and to that end, they make progression more linear than it has been in the past. New monsters mean a new meta. You are more effective if you hunt what is new than what is not, and this gets so obvious and front-facing that eventually all you need to hunt is a single monster at the end of the game. Sure, you can still hunt everything else, but is there a point to bullying everything like that for armor and weapons that in no way will be beneficial to you? It used to feel to me like I could create one good set, but then start working on a completely different set, and that could be better for specific hunts. I don't think that's the case anymore. I think at some point, the power of the hunter is so great that you only need whatever the latest thing is to be effective. You mix and match armor pieces, sure, but I doubt you'll be swapping out entire armor sets based on the monster, maybe your weapon. Say what you will about the longsword being easy mode in the past, but it is truly the case now. The fact that I can go through any hunt by spamming a single button after easily reaching max spirit gauge is such a disservice to the series. I know it's not only LS that suffers from this, and I'm sure your weapon probably suffers as well. If it does, be sure to let me know in the comments because I am legitimately curious how this experience is for everyone else. The game has never felt more like a generic hack and slash experience, a power fantasy, a game without purpose, commitment, or preparation. If those are the things that make a good Monster Hunter game, then surely this is the worst game in the series thus far. Maybe one day we'll finally have that remaster I've been waiting for. Until then, I think I'll just end up making do with the older experiences on private servers and the side games like Monster Hunter Stories. I enjoyed going through Wilds, but there was no reason for me to return to it aside from seeing how they handled laggy. And while that is fine for most Monster Hunter games, to be done with them for a while and feel content, that's clearly not what Wilds wants. It expects you to keep coming back over and over again, feeding you a little extra content here and there. If that's their philosophy, I think that's wrong, and I think they failed, because this setup for a game like Wilds has the opposite effect for me. I didn't even try laggy until Title Update 4 when making this video. I think everything here should have been in from the get-go to offer a satisfying conclusion where I felt content upon putting the controller down, knowing I have seen all there is to see and done all there is to do, to have seen the vision of the completed experience in all of its glory. But that's not what you get when you buy a Monster Hunter game day one anymore. Instead, you get a shell of what that completed experience is supposed to be. Monster Hunter Wilds, in turn, is a shell of what Monster Hunter as a series used to be. Thanks for watching, everyone, and I'll see you in the next video. Hey, thanks so much for making it to the end of the video. This is the Patreon section where I shout out people. They're here, usually here. If you want to help out, you can support the channel by subscribing to my Patreon. You get your name in the credits. You get shouted out if you're the G rank. I also offer thumbnail previews for some of the more major videos, so you can check those out as well. Sometimes you get a little bit of insights into the video. Shout out to Alberio, Gim Best YouTuber 69, Dylan Delaney, Critical Link, Gloomorous, Backdraft 677, Natsuki Mamamura, Brendan Hesse, Metalhead Frank, Ashtray, Cyberworm, Strangely, Rosaleo, and Mr. Janky, who also proofreads the grand majority of my scripts, including this one. The next video should be something like either Fallout 2 or .hack GU Volume 2, because a new .hack game got announced, which is like insane. That never happens. That never happens. So I really want to get that series done if I can. So I might be working on that. I don't know yet. Anyway, thanks for watching, everyone, and I will see you in the next video.